Your mother is dead, and this will say this seaside villa belongs to me. You have exactly 45 minutes to pack your trash and get out before I call the police. That was what my stepfather, Marcus, said to me as my mother's coffin was lowered. He was smiling like a lottery winner, thinking he could sell the estate to pay his gambling debts. But he forgot I am a forensic accountant. Sit down, because I'm going to tell you how I made him sign his own eviction notice at the closing. My name is Camille Fairmont, and I learned the hardest lesson of my life standing in the freezing rain at Hillside Memorial in Seattle. The lesson was not about death, nor was it about the fragility of life. It was about the absolute, terrifying coldness of greed. The sky was a bruised shade of gray, weeping a constant, miserable drizzle that soaked through the shoulders of my black wool coat. It chilled me to the bone, but the coldness radiating from the man standing next to me was far worse. My mother, Valerie, was being lowered into the wet earth. The mahogany casket gleamed with rain droplets, looking impossibly small against the gaping mouth of the grave. I felt a physical hollowness in my chest, a void where my heart used to be. For the past 6 months, I had been her nurse, her advocate, and her anchor as the cancer stripped her away piece by piece. I was exhausted. My eyes were swollen and gritty from days of sleepless vigils and nights of silent weeping. I wanted nothing more than to go home to the cliffside, my mother's estate, curl up in her favorite velvet armchair, and sleep for a week. Marcus Thorne, my stepfather, stood to my right. To the casual observer, he was the picture of a devastated widower. He was clutching a damp handkerchief, dabbing at dry eyes, his shoulders shaking with what looked like suppressed sobs. The neighbors and business associates filed past us, offering hushed condolences and patting him on the back. "He is so strong," I heard Mrs. Gable whisper to her husband as she walked by. "Poor Marcus. He loved Valerie so much." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. They saw a grieving husband. I saw a man who had checked his gold Rolex 4 times in the last 10 minutes. I saw the way his sobs ceased instantly whenever no one was looking directly at him. I saw the impatience twitching in his jaw muscle. Marcus was not mourning. He was waiting. He was performing a role, and like a bad actor, he was eager for the curtain to fall so he could get back to his real life. Finally, the last of the black umbrellas moved away toward the line of parked cars. The priest murmured a final blessing and retreated to the reception hall. We were alone. The cemetery was silent except for the rhythmic patter of rain on the grass and the distant hum of traffic on the interstate. The transformation was instantaneous. It was like watching a snake shed its skin. Marcus straightened his spine, the slump of grief vanishing as if it had never existed. He shoved the handkerchief into his pocket with a sneer of disgust. He turned to me, his eyes hard and flat, devoid of any warmth or empathy. "Finally," he muttered, smoothing down the lapels of his expensive Italian suit. "I thought those old bats would never leave." I stared at him, unable to process the sudden shift. "Marcus, we should get back to the house. The reception." "There is no reception for you, Camille," he interrupted, his voice sharp. "And there is no house for you either." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded, crumpled piece of paper. He did not hand it to me. He flicked it at me, like one might toss a wrapper into a trash can. The paper fluttered through the rain and landed in the mud near my boots. "Read it," he commanded. I bent down, my fingers numb from the cold, and picked up the damp sheet. It was a photocopy. A cheap, grainy photocopy of a document titled "Codicil to the Last Will and Testament of Valerie Fairmont." My heart hammered against my ribs. A codicil. My mother had never mentioned a codicil. Her will had been drafted years ago by Arthur Vance, her trusted attorney, leaving everything to me with a life estate provision for Marcus. I scanned the text. The legal jargon was clumsy, filled with typos. It stated that due to my instability and lack of financial responsibility, my mother was revoking her previous will and leaving the entirety of her estate, including the property known as the Cliffside, solely to her husband, Marcus Thorne. My eyes fell to the bottom of the page. The date was from 3 days before my mother slipped into her final coma. And then I saw the signature. It was a jagged, shaky scrawl. It looked like a spider had been dipped in ink and dragged across the page. It bore a vague resemblance to my mother's handwriting. But it was wrong, all wrong. My mother, even in her weakness, had a specific fluidity to her V. This signature was sharp, angular, and desperate. It was a forgery, a clumsy, pathetic forgery. I looked up at Marcus. He was watching me with a smug, predatory grin. "Valerie signed this to ensure I was taken care of," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity before hardening into steel. "I have already listed the house. You have exactly 45 minutes to pack your trash and get out before I call the police and report you for trespassing." The words hung in the cold air. Trespassing. In the home where I grew up. In the home my mother had built with her own success before she ever met this leech. "This is fake," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "Mom didn't sign this. She couldn't hold a pen 3 days before the coma. I was there, Marcus. I was there every single minute. You weren't—" Marcus stepped closer, invading my personal space. He smelled of stale bourbon and expensive cologne, a nauseating combination. "You were tired. Camille, you were emotional. You missed things. And frankly, who is a judge going to believe a grieving husband with a signed document, or a hysterical daughter who has been out of work for 6 months?" He laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "The cliffside is worth $8 million in this market. Do you really think I'm going to let you keep it while I walk away with nothing I have bills to pay?" He gestured toward the cemetery gates. I followed his gaze. Parked just outside the iron fence, idling with its engine running, was my mother's vintage Porsche 911. Sitting in the driver's seat was a woman with platinum blonde hair and oversized sunglasses. It was Sienna. I knew who she was. She was a failed real estate agent Marcus had met at a casino 6 months ago. He had introduced her as a consultant once, but I wasn't stupid. I had seen the text messages pop up on his phone when he left it on the kitchen counter. I had seen the way she looked at him, and now, barely an hour after my mother was on the ground, she was sitting in my mother's car, waiting to move into my mother's house. "Sienna is waiting," Marcus said, checking his watch again. "We have a bottle of champagne chilling at the house. Celebration of life, you know, or rather, celebration of new ownership." The cruelty was breathtaking. It was designed to break me. He wanted me to scream. He wanted me to attack him. He wanted a scene that he could use later to prove I was unstable, just as the fake codicil claimed. But as I looked at him, really looked at him, I saw something else. I am a forensic accountant. My entire career is built on looking past the surface, finding the hidden patterns in the numbers, the tiny discrepancies that reveal the truth. And right now, looking at Marcus, I saw the discrepancy. His hands were trembling. Not from grief, but from adrenaline. There was a sheen of sweat on his upper lip despite the 40-degree weather. His eyes were darting around nervously, checking the perimeter as if he expected someone to jump out from behind a tombstone. He wasn't just greedy, he was terrified. A man who has legally inherited $8 million does not act this frantic. A man who has won doesn't need to throw his stepdaughter out in 45 minutes. He was rushing. He was desperate. He needed to sell that house. And he needed to sell it fast. "Why the rush, Marcus?" I asked, keeping my face blank. "The probate courts take months." "I have a cash buyer," he snapped. Too quickly. "A private investor. We close on Friday. That is why you need to get out. Today." Friday. That was in 3 days. No legitimate real estate transaction for an $8 million estate closes in 3 days, especially not with a contested will, unless it wasn't a legitimate transaction, unless he was bypassing the courts entirely. "I understand," I said. Marcus blinked, surprised by my capitulation. "You do?" "Yes," I lied. "I understand that you have the power now." He puffed up his chest, preening like a peacock. Good. Glad you are finally seeing the reason. Now, here are the rules. You take your clothes. You take your toiletries. Nothing else. No jewelry. No silver. No electronics other than your personal laptop. If I see you walking out with anything worth more than $100, I will have you arrested for theft. Sienna will be watching you. He turned on his heel and walked toward the Porsche. I watched him go, a bitter bile rising in my throat. He was going to erase us. He was going to wipe away every trace of my mother and me to pay for his sins. I walked back to my car, a sensible sedan that looked like a toy next to the Porsche. I drove the familiar winding road to the cliffside, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. When I arrived, Sienna was already there. She was leaning against the front door, twirling my mother's keychain on her finger. She was wearing a black dress that was far too short for a funeral, and she was chewing gum. "You must be Camille," she said, popping a bubble. "Marcus said you might be difficult. I hope we won't have a problem. I'd hate to call the cops on such a sad day." She didn't look sad. She looked like she was mentally measuring the windows for new drapes. "Open the door, Sienna," I said, my voice flat. She smirked and unlocked the grand oak doors. I stepped inside. The house smelled of lilies and lemon polish. The scent of my childhood. The grand foyer, with its sweeping staircase and ocean view, felt like a sanctuary that had been violated. 45 minutes, Sienna called out from the kitchen, where I heard the pop of a cork. She was opening the champagne, my mother's vintage Dom Perignon, saved for a special occasion. I walked straight past her, up the stairs, and into my bedroom. I didn't cry. I didn't have time to cry. I had work to do. Marcus had said nothing over $100, but he had underestimated what true value was. He thought value was in the silver, the paintings, the antique vases. He didn't know that the most valuable thing in this house wasn't hanging on the walls. I pulled my suitcase from the closet. I packed my clothes mechanically, jeans, sweaters, the black dress I was wearing. Then I went to my desk. I grabbed my laptop. This machine contained the backup codes for the house's internal server. I grabbed the external hard drive that held years of family photos, and more importantly, the digitized financial records I had been helping my mother organize before she got too sick. I looked around the room. On the nightstand was a framed photo of my mother and me at my college graduation. She was beaming, looking healthy and vibrant. I took the photo out of the frame. The frame was silver, likely worth $200, so I left it. I slipped the photo into my pocket. Then, I went down the hall to my mother's room. The door was open. Sienna had already been in there. The drawers of the jewelry armoire were pulled open, ransacked. I felt a surge of murderous rage, but I pushed it down. Focus. I knelt by the bed. "Oliver," I whispered. A pair of frightened green eyes peered out from under the dust ruffle. Oliver, my mother's Maine coon cat, had been hiding since the ambulance took her away. He was big, fluffy, and terrified. "Come here, buddy," I coaxed. "We are leaving." He crawled out, meowing softly. I scooped him up. He was heavy, a solid 20 pounds of fur and comfort. Marcus hated cats. He would have thrown Oliver out into the street or taken him to a kill shelter. I put Oliver in his carrier. I slung my laptop bag over my shoulder and dragged my suitcase to the top of the stairs. 40 minutes had passed. I walked down the stairs. Marcus was in the living room now, glass of champagne in hand, laughing at something Sienna had said. They looked up as I descended. "Time is up," Marcus said, grinning. "Let's see the bag." He walked over and kicked my suitcase. "Clothes." "Clothes?" I said. He peered at the cat carrier. "Good riddance to that beast. Hate the way it sheds." Sienna took a sip of champagne, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Nice coat. Camille, is that cashmere? Might be worth more than 100. "It is a wool blend," I said calmly. "Target, $40. It was actually Italian wool worth $600. A gift from my mother last Christmas, but they wouldn't know the quality if it hit them in the face." "Get out," Marcus said, gesturing to the door with his glass. "And don't come back." The locks will be changed by noon." I looked at him one last time. I memorized his face. I memorized the arrogance, the cruelty, the sloppy way his tie was knotted. I wanted to remember exactly how he looked in this moment of triumph, so I could savor the contrast when I destroyed him. "Enjoy the house, Marcus," I said. "While you can," he laughed. "Oh, I will. I plan to enjoy the proceeds even more." I walked out the door and into the rain. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I stood on the porch for a moment, the rain mingling with the tears I finally allowed to fall. I was homeless. I was orphaned. I was stripped of my inheritance. But as I walked to my car, putting Oliver in the passenger seat, a cold resolve settled in my gut, freezing the tears on my cheeks. Marcus thought he had taken everything. He thought he had won because he held the keys. He forgot one thing. I was the one who installed the smart home system. I was the one who set up the passwords. And I was the one who knew where the digital bodies were buried. I started the engine and drove away from the cliffside without looking back. Let them have their champagne. Let them celebrate. Because while they were drinking to their victory, I was already planning the war. And unlike Marcus, I didn't gamble. I calculated. And the numbers were about to turn very, very bad for him. The vacancy sign of the Starlight Motel buzzed with a rhythmic, irritating hum that seemed to match the throbbing in my temples. I sat on the edge of a mattress that sagged in the middle, staring at the peeling beige wallpaper. The room smelled of industrial-strength lemon cleaner, fighting a losing battle against decades of stale cigarette smoke and despair. It was a sharp, brutal drop from the hand-woven Persian rugs and the scent of fresh sea air at the cliffside. But at least here, the door locked from the inside. Oliver, my mother's massive Maine Coon, was prowling the perimeter of the small room, his tail twitching with anxiety. He sniffed at the stained carpet and looked up at me with wide, confused eyes, letting out a low, mournful yowl. I reached down and buried my hand in his thick fur. The vibration of his purr, the only grounding force in a world that had suddenly spun off its axis. I needed to sleep. My body was screaming for it. But every time I closed my eyes, the silence of the motel room was replaced by the phantom sounds of the last 6 months, the rhythmic hissing of the oxygen concentrator, the beep of the morphine pump, the dry, rattling cough that tore through my mother's frail chest and seemed to rip through my own lungs in sympathy. For half a year, my life had been a blur of oncology appointments, pharmacy runs, and nights spent sleeping in a plastic chair next to her hospital bed, which we had set up in the living room so she could look at the ocean. I became an expert in palliative care, learning to measure doses of liquid morphine with the precision of a chemist, learning to read the subtle changes in her breathing that signaled pain or distress. I was there for every terrifying moment. Marcus was not. The anger I felt toward my stepfather began to simmer, heating the cold hollow in my chest, while I was wiping my mother's brow with cool clothes to break her fever. Marcus was always conveniently away. "I have to go to Chicago for the merger," he would say, adjusting his silk tie in the hallway mirror, not even glancing at the woman wasting away in the next room. "It is for our future. Camille, someone has to keep the money coming in." "I have a conference in Miami," he said 2 weeks later, dragging a Toomey suitcase down the stairs, while I was trying to convince my mother to eat a single spoonful of broth. I remembered the nights I sat alone in the dark, listening to my mother moan in her sleep, wondering where her husband was. I would check his Instagram, which he kept private, but I had a burner account he didn't know about. While I was changing bedsheets, he was posting photos of steak dinners and bottles of wine with captions like, "grinding," and "hustle never sleeps." But in the reflection of a wine glass in one of those photos, I had seen a blurry figure, a woman with platinum blonde hair. It all made sense now. The business trips were auditions for his new life. He was not working. He was waiting for the clock to run out. A specific memory clawed its way to the surface, sharp and vivid. It was about 3 weeks ago. My mother had a rare moment of clarity. The pain meds had worn off slightly, and she was sitting up, looking out at the gray water of the Pacific. Marcus had just returned from a 4-day trip to Vegas, claiming he was meeting with potential investors for a tech startup. He walked into the makeshift sick room, not with flowers, but with a leather folder. "Valerie, darling," he had said, his voice dripping with that fake, oily sweetness that made my skin crawl. "I hate to bother you with business, but the accountants need a signature on these tax forms. Just a formality." I was in the kitchen preparing tea, but I stopped listening. "Can it wait, Marcus?" My mother's voice was weak, barely a whisper. "My hands hurt today." "It is time-sensitive. Val," he pressed, pulling a pen from his pocket. He clicked it open, the sound loud in the quiet room. "Just sign right here. I will handle the rest." I had walked into the room then, setting the tea tray down with a deliberate clatter. "What are you having her sign, Marcus?" He jumped, snapping the folder shut. "Just tax documents. Camille, you wouldn't understand. It is high-level asset management. I am a forensic accountant, Marcus," I had reminded him, my voice cold. "I understand asset management better than you do. Let me see it." "This is between a husband and his wife," he snapped, his face flushing red. He turned back to my mother, shoving the pen into her trembling hand. "Just sign it, Val. Do it for me." My mother looked at him, her eyes glassy but suddenly focused. She looked at the pen, then at the folder, and finally at his face. She let the pen drop from her fingers onto the blanket. "No," she whispered. "Valerie?" "No," she said, louder this time. She closed her eyes and turned her head toward the window. "I am tired. Marcus, leave me alone." He had stormed out of the room, muttering curses under his breath. I picked up the folder he had left on the bedside table, intending to check it, but he snatched it back before I could open it. "Mind your own business," he had hissed, his eyes wild with a desperation I hadn't recognized at the time. Now, sitting in the motel room, the pieces clicked into place. That wasn't a tax form. That was the deed, or the will. He had been trying to get her to sign away the estate weeks before she died. When she refused, when she couldn't be manipulated, he panicked. He had waited until she was on the ground, and then he had forged what he couldn't force. But why the desperation? Why the sloppiness? Marcus was a narcissist, yes, but he usually prided himself on his smooth operation. The forgery I had seen at the cemetery was amateur hour. It was jagged, shaky, and dated 3 days before the coma, a time when her medical records would clearly show she was incapacitated. It was a document that would never hold up in court, unless he never intended for it to go to court. "I have a cash buyer," he had told me. "We close on Friday." Friday, that was 48 hours away. He was rushing a multi-million-dollar transaction in less than a week. That wasn't just greed. That was fear. I pulled my laptop out of my bag and set it on the wobbly desk. The blue light of the screen illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. I cracked my knuckles, a habit from my college days before exams. I wasn't just Camille Fairmont, the grieving daughter anymore. I was a senior associate at Helios Forensics, and I hunted financial discrepancies for a living. I didn't need to hack into a bank. People like Marcus, people who live beyond their means and try to project an image of wealth, leave footprints everywhere. They are sloppy with their digital hygiene because they are arrogant. I started with the public records. I pulled up the deed history for the cliffside. It was clean, still in my mother's name. No liens. That meant he hadn't managed to mortgage it behind her back, likely because the bank required both signatures and a notary who actually did their job. Then I moved to Marcus. I ran a credit check using the specialized software we used at Helios. It wasn't illegal. I had his social security number from the hospital admission forms I had filled out for him when he claimed he had chest pains a few months back, which turned out to be indigestion from too much lobster. The screen is populated with red flags. His credit score was in the low 400s. He had maxed out 5 credit cards, totaling over $200,000. But that was small potatoes. That was lifestyle debt. That doesn't make a man forge a will and risk federal prison. I needed to dig deeper. I needed to see where the money was going. I accessed a database that tracked high-risk financial behavior associated with known gambling sites and offshore crypto exchanges. There it was. Marcus hadn't been investing in tech startups during those trips to Vegas. He had been funneling money into an unregulated crypto exchange based in the Caymans. And he wasn't just buying Bitcoin, he was leveraging. He was trading on margins that would make a Wall Street banker vomit. I traced the transaction logs. 6 months ago, around the time my mother got her terminal diagnosis, Marcus had made a massive bet. He had shorted a volatile altcoin, betting everything he had and a lot of money he didn't have that it would crash. It didn't crash. It skyrocketed in a matter of 48 hours. Marcus had lost everything. But here was the kicker: he hadn't used his own money. He had borrowed it. I followed the digital trail of the loan. It wasn't from a bank. It was from a shell company called Obsidian Ventures, LLC. It sounded corporate, but when I cross-referenced the LLC's registration with the databases we maintained at Helios for tracking money laundering operations, the facade crumbled. Obsidian Ventures was a front. It was a collection arm for an Eastern European syndicate that operated out of Chicago. These weren't bankers. These were loan sharks who wore suits and used complex financial instruments to mask simple extortion. The principal amount was $3 million, but with the exorbitant, illegal interest rates they charged, the current balance was staggering: $6 million. I stared at the number on the screen. $6 million. That was why he needed the cliffside. The house was worth $8 million. If he sold it quickly for a cash offer, even a lowball offer, he could pay off the syndicate, take the remaining $2 million, and disappear with Sienna before anyone realized the will was fake. I scrolled down to the communication log associated with the debt. Our software scraped data from leaked dark web servers, and sometimes, if you were lucky, you found emails. I found one. It was sent to Marcus's encrypted email address 2 days ago. Subject: Final notice. Message: The extension is denied. Liquidation protocol initiates at 5 p.m. on Friday. Have the funds or we collect in flesh. My blood ran cold. Liquidation protocol. Collect in flesh. These people didn't send angry letters. They sent men with baseball bats. Or worse, Marcus wasn't just selling the house to get rich. He was selling it to stay alive. He was a cornered rat, and the cliffside was his only piece of cheese. The timeline was absolute. Friday at 5 o'clock. If he didn't have $6 million wired to Obsidian Ventures by close of business on Friday, he was a dead man. I sat back in the creaky chair, the realization washing over me. This was my leverage. This was the weapon I had been looking for. If I went to the police with the forgery now, they would open an investigation. They would freeze the assets. The house would be tied up in probate for months, maybe years. Marcus would be arrested eventually. Sure, but in the meantime, the syndicate wouldn't get their money. And while I hated Marcus, I didn't want him murdered by mobsters. That was too quick. That was too easy. I wanted him to suffer. I wanted him to feel the walls closing in. I wanted him to experience the exact same helplessness he had inflicted on my mother and me. I looked at the clock on my laptop. It was midnight. Marcus thought he was the master of the universe because he held a forged piece of paper. He thought he had outsmarted everyone, but he was standing on a trap door, and he didn't even know I had my hand on the lever. He needed a buyer. He needed a fast, no questions asked closing by Friday. He was desperate for someone to walk in with a bag of cash and save his life. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was the first time I had smiled in weeks. I wouldn't stop the sale. I would facilitate it. I would give him exactly what he wanted. I would be the answer to his prayers, the miracle he was begging for. And then, when he was standing at the finish line, thinking he had survived, I would pull the ground out from under him. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It was late, but I knew he would be awake. Arthur Vance, my mother's attorney, was an insomniac who worked best when the rest of the world was sleeping. "Camille," his gruff voice answered on the second ring. "I heard about the funeral. I am so sorry I couldn't be there. I was in court in Boston. It is okay, Arthur, I said, my voice steady and strong. But I need your help. Marcus kicked me out. He has a forged codicil, and he is selling the house on Friday. He is what? Arthur's voice boomed. I will have a judge sign an injunction by 9 a.m. tomorrow. We will stop this. No, I said. We are not going to stop it. Arthur, we are going to let him do it. Camille, are you in shock if he sells that house to a bona fide purchaser? He won't sell it to a bona fide purchaser, I cut in. He is going to sell it to us. There was silence on the other end of the line. I need you to set up a shell company. Arthur, I continued, typing furiously on my laptop as I spoke. Something that sounds rich and impatient. We are going to make Marcus an offer he literally cannot refuse. He needs $6 million by Friday to pay off a loan shark. We are going to offer him 7. You want to buy your own house? Arthur asked, sounding confused. No, I said. I want him to evict himself. You told me once about the life estate clause in Mom's original will. The poison pill. Yes, Arthur said slowly, the gears turning in his legal mind. If he attempts to sell, the life estate is void ab initio. Exactly. So let's help him attempt it. Let's help him succeed at the attempt, right up until the ink is wet. I could hear the smile in Arthur's voice when he replied, Camille, you are your mother's daughter. Meet me at my office at 7 a.m. Bring the cat. I hung up the phone and looked down at Oliver. He had curled up on the pillow next to me. We are going to get our house back. Oliver, I whispered. And we are going to send Marcus to a place much worse than a motel. I closed the laptop. The neon light from the vacancy sign flickered outside, casting long, dancing shadows on the wall. I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. I was the one bringing the storm. The blue glow of my laptop screen was the only light in the motel room, casting long, dancing shadows against the peeling wallpaper. Outside, the highway traffic hummed a steady, indifferent rhythm, but inside, the air was thick with the static of a different kind of connection. Marcus had been thorough, or at least, he thought he had been. When I left the cliffside, I received a notification on my phone that my access to the smart locks had been revoked. He had deleted my user profile from the front door, the garage, and the side gate. He probably felt very secure, imagining himself the king of a fortress I could no longer breach. But Marcus was a man who thought technology began and ended with an iPhone. He did not understand the architecture of a smart home, especially not one designed by a woman who made her living dissecting digital fraud. He had changed the locks. Yes, he had even changed the Wi-Fi password, likely to something predictable like his own birthday. But he did not know about the hardwired intranet I had installed 18 months ago. When my mother's health first began to decline, I had set up a closed-circuit monitoring system. It was separate from the consumer-grade security that ran the doorbell cameras. This was a standalone system, running on a hidden local area network, designed to monitor her vitals and ensure she was safe if I had to step out for groceries. I had hidden the cameras myself. They were not the bulky white orbs you see in department stores. These were pinhole lenses, no larger than the head of a match, concealed within the spines of hollowed-out books in the library and the intricate molding of the ceiling in the living room. I opened the terminal on my laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing in the command lines to initiate a secure shell handshake. I wasn't trying to crack his new Wi-Fi password. That was child's play and ultimately unnecessary. Instead, I pinged the router's backdoor. A port I had left open for maintenance. A cursor blinked. Access granted. A grim satisfaction settled in my stomach. I was in. I navigated the file directory. Bypassing the main security interface and located the video feed, I selected the camera in the library. That was where Marcus held court. That was where he felt most powerful. The screen flickered, then stabilized into a high-definition stream. The image was crystal clear. It was live. The library, my favorite room in the house, looked like a scene from a frat party. My mother's antique globes had been pushed aside. The mahogany desk, where she used to write her correspondence, was cluttered with fast food wrappers and legal pads. And there they were. Marcus was sitting in my mother's leather executive chair, his feet propped up on the desk. He was holding a glass of dark red wine. I squinted at the screen. It was the Chateau Margaux, 1996. My mother had bought that bottle for my wedding day, whenever that might be. Now, it was being swilled by a man who couldn't tell the difference between a vintage Bordeaux and grape juice. Sienna was pacing the room. She looked agitated. She was smoking a cigarette, dashing directly onto the Persian rug. I flinched physically. My mother would have had a stroke if she saw someone smoking in the library. I plugged in my headphones and turned up the gain on the audio feed. The microphone, hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of Great Expectations, was sensitive enough to pick up a whisper. "Relax, babe," Marcus said, his voice slurring slightly. He took a heavy swig of the wine. "You are going to wear a hole in the carpet, and that is an expensive carpet, or at least, it was." "I am not worried about the carpet, Marcus," Sienna snapped. She stopped pacing and turned to him. "I am worried about the girl. She did not scream. She did not fight. She just left. It was weird. People don't just walk away from an $8 million house." Marcus laughed. It was an ugly, wet sound. "I told you, Camille is weak. She is a bookworm, a calculator with legs. She spends her life looking at spreadsheets. She doesn't have the stomach for a fight." "She is a forensic accountant," Sienna countered, her voice rising. "She finds things out for a living." "She won't find anything," Marcus said, swinging his legs off the desk and leaning forward. "Because there is nothing to find. The will is ironclad." "Is it?" Sienna asked. She walked over to the desk and lowered her voice, but the microphone caught every syllable. "That signature, Marcus, it looked shaky." Marcus slammed his hand down on the desk. "It looked like a dying woman signed it. That is the point I spent 2 weeks practicing that damn scrawl. 2 weeks. Sienna, I sat in this very room, tracing her old checks until my hand cramped. By the end, even I couldn't tell the difference. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. There it was, the confession. He had just admitted to the forgery on tape. I moved my mouse, hitting the record button to ensure the stream was being captured directly to my encrypted cloud drive. "And what about the notary?" Sienna pressed, clearly still anxious. "If they question him—" "Greg," Marcus scoffed. "Greg is a gambling buddy from the track. He needed $5,000 to cover his own bad debts. I gave him the cash. He stamped the paper, and he backdated it. He is not going to talk. If he talks, he loses his license and goes to jail. We are safe." 2 weeks practicing, I whispered to the empty motel room, and a bribed notary named Greg. This was gold. This was the smoking gun. In a civil trial. This video would guarantee a win. It proved fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. "But we have to move fast," Marcus continued, his bravado slipping just a fraction to reveal the fear underneath. "The lender is pushing. We need the cash by Friday." "What if we can't sell it by Friday?" Sienna asked. "We will," Marcus said. "I listed it on the shadow market. It is an off-market exchange for high-net-worth investors who want privacy. No Zillow, no Redfin, no yard signs. Just cash buyers looking to park money fast. I undercut the market value by 20%. At that price, sharks will be circling by morning. And then, Marcus smiled, a cruel, twisted expression. "We take the cash, pay off the debt, and we go to Mexico. I have already looked at a place in Tulum. We live like kings, and Camille can spend the next 10 years trying to sue a ghost." I stopped the recording. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, hard rage. He was planning to flee. He was going to sell my mother's legacy, pay off his criminal debts, and vanish across the border before the ink was even dry. I saved the file, then I made 2 backups, one to a server in Switzerland, and one to a physical hard drive I kept in my bag. I sat back. staring at the frozen image of Marcus laughing on the screen. I had enough. Right now. I could call the police. I could call the FBI. I could send this video to the district attorney, and they would have Marcus in handcuffs by sunrise. But as I watched him pour another glass of my mother's wine, I realized that wasn't enough. If I called the police now, they would arrest him for forgery. He would make bail. He would hire a lawyer. He would claim he was drunk when he said those things, that he was grieving, that it was just talk. The legal battle would drag on. The house would be seized as evidence or frozen in probate limbo. The mobsters would disappear into the woodwork, and Marcus might even cut a deal. And most importantly, he would still have hope. No, I didn't want him to have hope. I wanted him to have nothing. I remembered the look on his face at the funeral. Absolute arrogance, the way he had treated me like a nuisance to be discarded. Arresting him now would be a mercy. It would save him from the syndicate, and it would save him from the total, humiliating destruction he deserved. He wanted to sell the house. Fine. I would let him sell the house. I needed to find that listing. I opened a new browser window. Marcus had mentioned the shadow market. It was a colloquial term for a specific tier of non-public real estate listings, often used by celebrities or politicians who didn't want their addresses known. But it was also used by people like Marcus people, who needed to liquidate assets without alerting creditors or family members. Accessing these networks required credentials I didn't personally have. But Helios Forensics did. We used them to track assets in divorce cases. I logged into my work, VPN, masking my IP address. I navigated to the portal for Onyx Listings, one of the most popular private exchanges on the West Coast. I typed in the parameters Seattle area, waterfront, price range between $6 and $8 million. The search wheel spun for a second, then populated a single result. Listing ID 7492. Location undisclosed. Coastal Estate, Seattle, WA. Description: breathtaking oceanfront villa, 5 bedrooms, 6 baths, motivated seller, cash only, immediate closing required. Price $6.5 million. He was desperate. The house was worth $8 million easily, maybe 9 in a bidding war. He was listing it for 6.5, just enough to pay off the $6 million debt and have a little left over for his getaway to Mexico. I looked at the timestamp. The listing had gone live 3 hours ago. Motivated seller, I read aloud. You have no idea. Marcus. I clicked on the contact information. It didn't list Marcus's name directly. It listed a generic email address, Cliffside owner, Proton Mail. Com. He was trying to be clever. He was trying to be anonymous. But he had already told me everything I needed to know. I closed the browser and looked at the time. It was now 2 a.m. In 5 hours, I was meeting Arthur Vance. I picked up the phone and dialed Arthur's private line again. I knew I had said I would see him at 7, but this changed things. We needed to move faster. Camille. He sounded awake this time. I am already at the office. I couldn't sleep. I have the proof, I said, my voice calm and deadly. I have video and audio of him admitting to the forgery and the bribery, and I know where the house is listed. Good God, Arthur breathed. Bring it in. We can go to the prosecutor. No, Arthur, I interrupted. The plan hasn't changed. In fact, it is more important than ever. He's planning to flee to Mexico on Friday afternoon. If we bring in the police now, he might run early. We need to keep him here. We need him to think he has won. You want to bait the hook, Arthur said. I want to be the shark, I corrected. He is looking for a cash buyer on the Onyx network. He wants a quick close. We are going to give him the quickest close in history. Get the shell company ready. I want an offer in his inbox by 8 a.m. Camille, Arthur said, his tone softening. Are you sure you can handle this? Seeing him watching him sell your mother's house? I looked at the screen one last time, at Marcus's smug, drunken face. I looked at the glass of wine he was holding, my mother's wine. I am not just going to watch him, Arthur, I said. I am going to cheer him on. I want him to feel the pen in his hand. I want him to sign that paper, because the moment he does, he isn't just selling a house, he is signing his life away. I hung up the phone. I didn't feel tired anymore. The exhaustion had burned away, replaced by a high-voltage current of adrenaline. I packed my laptop. I checked on Oliver, who was sleeping soundly. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. The rain had stopped. The sky was still dark, but in the distance, the faint gray light of dawn was beginning to bleed into the horizon. Marcus Thorne had started a war 45 minutes after my mother's funeral. He thought he was fighting a grieving daughter. He didn't realize he was fighting a woman who could see through walls. I grabbed my coat. It was time to go to work. The trap was set, and the mouse was already sniffing the cheese. The offices of Vance and Associates were located in a pre-war limestone building in downtown Seattle, a world away from the neon flicker of the Starlight Motel. Stepping out of the elevator on the 14th floor, the air changed instantly. The smell of stale cigarettes and damp wool was replaced by the scent of lemon oil, old leather, and the quiet, heavy atmosphere of billable hours. Arthur Vance was waiting for me. At 70 years old, Arthur was an institution in himself. He had been my mother's attorney for 3 decades, a man who believed in 3-piece suits, fountain pens, and the absolute sanctity of the law. He stood by the window overlooking the Puget Sound, his silhouette framed by the gray morning light. When he turned to face me, I saw the toll the last 24 hours had taken. His face was drawn, his eyes rimmed with red. He had loved my mother like a sister, and her death had struck him hard. "Camille," he said, his voice rough with emotion. He crossed the room and took my hands in his. "I would ask how you are holding up, but I can see it in your eyes. You are running on fumes and adrenaline." "I have enough adrenaline to finish this, Arthur," I replied, stepping back and setting my laptop bag on his mahogany conference table. "We don't have time for grief today. We have a deadline." Arthur sighed, shaking his head as he pulled out a chair for me. "I received your call. I have the shell company paperwork drafted. But Camille, I need you to be certain. We are walking a very fine line here. If we let this sale proceed, we are technically allowing a crime to occur. We are not allowing it, Arthur," I said, opening my laptop. "We are documenting it. Controlled delivery. It is no different than the FBI letting a drug deal go through to catch the supplier." I navigated to the encrypted file I had saved hours earlier. "Watch this." I played the video from the library. Arthur watched in silence, his jaw tightening with every second that passed. When Marcus laughed about practicing the forgery and bribing the notary, Arthur's face turned a shade of crimson I had never seen before. He was a man of the law, and seeing it mocked so casually, so arrogantly, was a personal insult. When the video ended, Arthur took off his glasses and cleaned them furiously with a silk handkerchief. It was a nervous tic I remembered from when I was a child. "This is repugnant," he whispered, putting his glasses back on. His hand hovered over the office phone. "I am calling the district attorney. We have a confession. We have a conspiracy. We can have a squad car at the cliffside in 20 minutes. We can have him removed." "And then what?" I asked, my voice cutting through the thick air of the room. "He gets arrested for forgery. He makes bail by noon. He claims the video was taken out of context, or that he was drunk and boasting. His lawyer argues that the signature is ambiguous. It becomes a civil battle that drags on for 3 years while he lives in my house and drains the estate to pay his legal fees. And the loan sharks, they will vanish. They won't get caught. Marcus will eventually get a slap on the wrist, and my mother's legacy will be wasted on court costs." Arthur hesitated, his hand pulling back from the phone. He knew I was right. The legal system was a blunt instrument, and Marcus was a slippery target. "I don't want to sue him, Arthur," I said, leaning forward. "I want to destroy him. I want him to face federal charges, wire fraud, money laundering, crimes that carry mandatory minimum sentences in federal prison, and to get that, we need him to complete the transaction. We need him to accept the money." Arthur looked at me, a mixture of concern and respect in his eyes. You are playing a dangerous game. Camille. I am playing the hand he dealt me, I countered. Now, let's talk about the will, the real will. Arthur nodded and walked to the wall safe behind his desk. He spun the dial, the tumblers clicking softly in the quiet room. He pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with wax. Your mother deposited this with me 5 years ago, Arthur said, placing the document on the table between us. She updated it right after she married Marcus. She loved him. Camille, she truly did. But she wasn't blind. She knew his history with money. She knew he had a hole in his pocket where his conscience should be. He slid the document toward me. She wanted to ensure he was never homeless. She wanted to protect him from himself. I opened the heavy folder. The text was dense, written in the archaic but precise language of estate law. I scanned the pages until I found the section Arthur had highlighted in yellow. Article 4, the life estate. Read it carefully, Arthur instructed. I read aloud. I, Valerie Fairmont, hereby grant to my husband, Marcus Thorne, a life estate in the real property commonly known as the Cliffside. This grant shall allow him the exclusive right to use, occupy, and enjoy the property for the duration of his natural life, provided that he remains responsible for all taxes, insurance, and maintenance. I looked up. He could have lived there forever, rent-free, ocean view. All he had to do was nothing. Keep reading, Arthur said, a small, sharp smile touching his lips. Clause 7b. We call it the poison pill. I looked back at the document. The text was bolded for emphasis. Clause 7b. Termination of life estate upon attempted alienation. In the event that the life tenant attempts to sell, mortgage, encumber, transfer, or otherwise alienate the title to the property, such action shall be deemed an immediate repudiation of this gift. Upon such attempt, the life estate shall automatically and instantly terminate, and full possession and fee simple title shall revert immediately to the remainder man. The remainder man, I whispered. That is me. That is you, Arthur confirmed. Do you see the beauty of it? Camille, your mother built a trap into the will. Just in case he ever got greedy, if Marcus had just lived in the house, he would have been safe. He would have had a roof over his head until the day he died. But the moment he tries to sell it, he doesn't just commit a crime, he legally evicts himself. I sat back, the magnitude of my mother's foresight washing over me. She knew, deep down, she must have known that Marcus valued money more than he valued her memory. She had given him a test, if he was loyal. He had a home, if he was greedy. He had nothing. So, I said, my mind racing. The moment he signs that deed on Friday, 2 things happen. 1. He commits federal wire fraud by selling property he does not own, and 2. He triggers Clause 7b, stripping himself of the only legal right he actually had. Precisely, Arthur said. He is walking into a double bind. He is selling his shelter to pay a debt, but the act of selling it destroys his right to the shelter. He ends up with no money, no house, and a prison sentence. It is poetic, I said. It is perfect. Arthur closed the folder and tapped the cover. But to trigger this, we need an attempt to sell. A completed attempt is best for evidence. We need a buyer. Aurora Holdings, I said, the name coming to me. That is the shell company. Yes, Arthur said, pulling a second file from his briefcase. Aurora Holdings International, registered in Delaware, managed by a privacy trust. I use it for high-net-worth clients who want to buy property without their names appearing in the public record. To the outside world, it is a black box with a checkbook. Does it have funds? I asked. I can verify proof of funds up to $20 million through a client escrow account. Arthur explained. We won't actually transfer the money to Marcus. Of course, we will freeze the wire at the intermediary bank the moment the closing is finished. But to Marcus and his title company, it will look like cold. Hard cash ready to drop. He needs $6 million, I said, thinking of the debt ledger. He listed the house for 6.5. If we offer him exactly what he is asking, he might get suspicious. It is too easy. Agreed, Arthur said, slipping back into his lawyer persona. We need to make him work for it. Make him feel like he is winning a negotiation. It validates his ego. He is arrogant, I added. But he is also desperate. If we push too hard, he might fold. If we offer too much, he might think it is a sting. So we come in strong but demanding, Arthur suggested. We offer $7.5 million. Above his asking price. Why higher? I asked. Because we are going to attach conditions, Arthur said, his eyes twinkling. We tell him Aurora Holdings is in a 1031 tax exchange. Do you know what that is? Real estate tax deferral. I nodded. The buyer has to reinvest profits from a previous sale into a new property within a strict time frame to avoid capital gains tax. Exactly, Arthur said. We tell him we have a deadline. We need to close in 48 hours, or we lose a massive tax break. That explains why we are rushing. That explains why we are paying cash. And that explains why we are willing to pay a premium. It gives him a logical reason for the speed. So he doesn't question it. I smiled. It was brilliant. It used the language of finance, the only language Marcus respected, to blind him. He would see the tax exchange as a lucky break, a corporate loophole he could exploit. $7.5 million, I mused. He will see dollar signs. He will calculate that he can pay the $6 million to the mob and keep $1.5 million for himself. That is enough to buy his condo in Tulum and live comfortably for a few years. He will think he has hit the jackpot, Arthur agreed. He won't just walk into the trap. He will run. Okay, I said, feeling the plan solidify into something heavy and real. Let's draft the offer. But Arthur, I want one more thing. What is that? I want to be at the closing. I said, I know Aurora Holdings is supposed to be anonymous, but the buyer needs a representative, right? Usually, I would send a junior associate. Arthur said, Send a junior associate to play the face, I said. But I want to be in the room, or at least, I want to see it. I need to see his face when the hammer drops. Arthur considered this. There is a conference room at Sterling Title with a two-way mirror. We use it for depositions sometimes. I can arrange for the closing to happen there. You can sit in the observation room. You will be 3 feet away from him, behind the glass. He won't see you, but you will see every bead of sweat. Perfect, I said. Arthur pulled a legal pad toward him and uncapped his fountain pen. All right, let's write this offer. Subject cash purchase of the cliffside. Buyer. Aurora Holdings. Price $7,500,000. Contingencies none. Closing date. Friday, 10 a.m. He looked up at me, his pen hovering over the paper. Are you ready to evict your stepfather? Camille. I thought about my mother, dying in that hospital bed while Marcus was in Vegas. I thought about Oliver shivering in the motel room. I thought about the fake signature and the fake tears. I am not just evicting him. Arthur, I said, my voice cold and steady. I am foreclosing on his entire existence. Arthur nodded and began to write. The scratch of his pen against the paper sounded like the sharpening of a knife. The letter was drafted, sealed, and sent via encrypted courier to the email address I had found on the shadow market listing. Now, all we had to do was wait for the greed to do its work. Send it, I said, my voice cutting through the hushed atmosphere of Arthur's office like a guillotine blade. Arthur Vance sat at his desk, his finger hovering over the enter key of his laptop. We had spent the last 2 hours crafting the perfect lure, a digital masterpiece designed to trigger the specific avarice of a man like Marcus Thorne. The email was not just a communication, it was a psychological weapon. We had created Aurora Holdings, a faceless, monolithic investment firm with a registered agent in Delaware and a web presence that consisted solely of a login page for high-net-worth clients. It looked exclusive, impenetrable, and exactly the sort of entity that would throw millions of dollars at a problem to make it go away. "Are you ready?" Arthur asked, looking over his spectacles at me. "Once this goes out, there is no turning back. We are initiating the fraud." "We are initiating the sting," I corrected him. "Do it." Arthur pressed the key. The email swooshed away into the ether, traveling through the fiber optic cables of the city, bouncing off servers, and landing with a silent digital ping in the inbox of a desperate man sitting in my mother's library. I turned immediately to my laptop, which was set up on the conference table. The live feed from the library camera was open. The room was bathed in the gray light of a Seattle morning. Marcus was there, slumped in the leather chair, staring at the ceiling. He looked worse than he had the night before. His tie was loosened. His hair was disheveled, and he was spinning a pen between his fingers with a nervous, frantic energy. Sienna was on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, looking bored and irritated. "He hasn't seen it yet," I whispered. "Give it a minute," Arthur said, standing up and pouring himself a fresh cup of coffee. "The server refresh rate is set to 30 seconds. On the screen. Marcus's phone buzzed on the desk. He ignored it. It buzzed again. He groaned, sat up, and reached for the device, likely expecting another threat from the loan sharks or a bill collector he couldn't pay. I leaned in, my face inches from the screen. "Read it, Marcus. Read it and weep." He unlocked the phone. I watched his eyes narrow as he scanned the notification. Then, his eyes went wide. He sat up straight, the chair squeaking in protest. He tapped the screen furiously, opening the email app. His mouth fell open. He stood up so fast the heavy leather chair rolled backward and hit the bookshelf. "Sienna!" he screamed. It wasn't a call. It was a shriek of pure, unadulterated relief. "Sienna, look at this. Look at this right now." Sienna jumped, dropping her phone. "What is it? The Russians, are they coming?" "No." Marcus was laughing now, a manic, high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. He ran around the desk and shoved the phone in her face. "It is a buyer, a cash buyer. Look at the offer." I recited the email in my head as they read it. Subject: immediate cash offer. Cliffside Estate. Principal: Aurora Holdings. Offer price: $7,500,000. Terms: all cash, no contingencies. Closing requirement: 48 hours. $7.5 million. Sienna gasped, her voice tinny through my headphones. "Is this real?" "It is better than real," Marcus crowed. "It is corporate. Look at the sender. Aurora Holdings. They are an investment group. Read the body text. They are in a 1031 tax exchange. They just sold a commercial property in San Francisco, and they have to park the capital in a new asset within 2 days, or they get hit with 40% capital gains tax. They are desperate to buy." "They are desperate," I murmured to Arthur, who was watching over my shoulder. "He bought the lie. He thinks he has the leverage." "Hook, line, and sinker," Arthur agreed. On the screen, Marcus was pacing the room, his energy transformed. He was no longer the hunted animal. He was the master of the universe again. "This saves us. Sienna, this saves everything. We pay the $6 million to Obsidian, and we walk away with $1.5 million clean. That is enough for the condo in Tulum and 10 years of margaritas." He grabbed Sienna by the waist and spun her around. They danced a clumsy, joyful jig in the center of the library, right on top of the Persian rug my mother had bought in Istanbul. It was a grotesque display. They were celebrating their survival on the ashes of my mother's legacy. "Call them," Sienna said, pulling away, breathless. "Call them right now before they change their minds." "I am calling," Marcus said. He dialed the number listed in the email. On the desk in Arthur's office, a burner phone began to ring. Arthur nodded to a man sitting in the corner of the room. This was David, a senior litigator at the firm who had a voice like gravel and a demeanor that could freeze water. We had cast him as the director of acquisitions for Aurora Holdings. David picked up the phone and put it on speaker. "Aurora Holdings, Acquisitions Department, this is David speaking. Yes, hello? Marcus's voice boomed through the speaker, overly loud and eager. This is Marcus Thorne. I am the owner of the cliffside property you emailed about. Listing ID 7492. Mr. Thorne, David said, his tone bored and professional. Hold on. Let me pull up the file. There was a pause. I could see Marcus on the screen, biting his lip, sweating. Right, David said. The waterfront property in Seattle. We are interested. As the email stated, we are in a tight 1031 exchange window. We need to deploy capital by close of business Friday. Can you close that fast? Absolutely, Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly. The title is clean. I am the sole executor and beneficiary. The paperwork is ready to go. Good, David said. Our analysts have looked at the preliminary data. It fits our portfolio targets. The offer stands at $7.5 million. Marcus pumped his fist in the air. That sounds excellent. We can... However, David interrupted, his voice sharpening. Marcus froze. I held my breath. This was the pivot point. If we made it too easy, if we just handed him the money, his paranoia might kick in. Desperate men are suspicious of miracles. We needed to make this feel like a transaction, not a gift. I am looking at the latest satellite imaging and the zoning reports for that sector, David said, improvising smoothly from the script we had prepared. We notice there is a retaining wall on the north side that looks like it might need structural reinforcement within the next 5 years, and the market comps for that specific zip code have softened in the last quarter due to the new municipal tax levies. The wall is fine, Marcus stammered. I mean, it is solid, and the house is pristine. Interior designer finishes. I am sure it is lovely, David said dismissively. But we are buying the land value and the asset class, not the curtains. Listen, Mr. Thorne, I have 3 other properties on my desk right now that fit our criteria. I can close on a penthouse in Vancouver in an hour for $6 million. I prefer your lot, but I cannot justify 7.5 to my board with the market softening. What? What are you saying? Marcus asked. $7,200,000. David said, that is the number. Take it or leave it. If you say yes, I wire the earnest money to your title company in 10 minutes and we sign on Friday. If you say no, I will call the Vancouver guy. I watched Marcus, his face flushed. $7.2 million. It was $300,000 less than the initial offer. It was a significant hit to his profit, but it still covered the debt to the mob with $1.2 million to spare. If he was a legitimate seller, he would push back. He would argue. He would ask for 7.4. But Marcus wasn't a seller. He was a fugitive waiting. Done, Marcus blurted out. 7.2 is acceptable. You accept the adjusted offer? David asked, ensuring the verbal contract was clear. Yes, 7.2 million. Cash. Closing Friday, Marcus said, speaking so fast the words ran together. Excellent, David said. I will have my legal team draft the purchase agreement. We will send it to your email within the hour. Do not shop this deal. Mr. Thorne, if I hear you are talking to other buyers, I pull the offer. No. You have my word, Marcus said. I am taking the listing down right now. Good. We will see you at the closing table. Friday, 10 a.m. We will use Sterling Title downtown. I will be there, Marcus promised. David hung up. In the library, Marcus let out a whoop of victory. We did it. We sold it. Sienna, however, was frowning. She walked over to him, her arms crossed. Why did they drop the price? Marcus, $300,000 in 10 seconds. That is aggressive. It is business, Sienna, Marcus said, dismissing her concern with a wave of his hand. They are sharks. They smelled blood. They knew I needed to close fast for the tax thing. So they squeezed me. That is how the big boys play. It proves they are real. If they had just handed me $7.5 million without blinking, I would have been worried it was a scam. But negotiating, that means they are serious. I smiled at the screen. Exactly, Marcus. You are so smart. But 1.2 million, Sienna calculated. That is less than we thought. It is still over $1 million. Babe, Marcus grabbed her shoulders. Do you know what $1 million buys in Mexico? We are going to live like royalty. And the best part? Camille gets nothing. Zero. She's probably sleeping in her car right now, while we are about to become millionaires. I felt a cold, hard knot tighten in my stomach. He wasn't just happy about saving himself, he was happy about destroying me. That was the difference between us. I was doing this for justice. He was doing it out of spite. Get the champagne, Marcus ordered. The real stuff this time. We are celebrating. Back in the office. Arthur was already typing up the contract. He took the bait, Arthur said, not looking up. 7.2 million. He didn't even try to meet in the middle. He doesn't care about the value of the house, I said, watching Marcus pour another glass of wine on the monitor. He only cares about the price of his life. He thinks he just bought his freedom. I will have the purchase agreement ready in 20 minutes, Arthur said. It will be a standard commercial contract. Very dense, very boring. I will bury the language about the life estate verification in the warranty section. He won't read it. He will just look for the price tag and the signature line. Make sure the clause about seller represents he has a simple title is bold, I said. I want him to see it. I want him to lie in writing. It will be there, Arthur promised. I looked back at the screen. Marcus was sitting in the chair again, his feet up, holding the glass of wine to the light. He looked like a king on his throne. He had no idea that the castle walls were already crumbling around him. You know, I said to Arthur, he told me yesterday that I should enjoy the house while I could. He gave me 45 minutes. And now? Arthur asked. Now I am giving him 48 hours, I said. 48 hours to dream. 48 hours to plan his tropical vacation. 48 hours to believe he got away with it. And then, at 10 o'clock on Friday morning, I am going to wake him up. Arthur hit print. The laser printer in the corner whirred to life, spitting out the pages of the contract that would seal Marcus's fate. It was a thick document, heavy with legal consequences. I need to go shopping, I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. Shopping? Arthur asked, surprised. Now? Yes, I said. If I am going to the closing, I need to look at the part. I am not going as the grieving daughter in the wool coat. I am going as the owner. I need a dress that says eviction. Arthur chuckled. A dry, dusty sound. Get something black. Camille. It is fitting for a funeral. Oh, it is not a funeral. Arthur, I said, picking up my bag. It is an execution. I walked out of the office, leaving the digital eyes of the camera focused on the man who was currently toasting to his own destruction. The trap was not just set. The prey had already walked inside and locked the door behind him. Now, all we had to do was wait for the clock to run out. The 48 hours leading up to the closing were not spent in quiet anticipation. They were a slow-motion car crash that I was forced to watch, frame by agonizing frame, from the glow of my laptop screen in the Starlight Motel. If the funeral was the murder of my happiness, the 2 days that followed were the desecration of the corpse. Marcus had accepted the offer from Aurora Holdings with the desperation of a drowning man grabbing a lifeline. But his greed was a bottomless pit. He had $7.2 million promised to him on Friday, yet that was not enough. He looked at the cliffside not as a home, but as a carcass to be picked clean before he abandoned it. On Wednesday afternoon, a white unmarked van pulled up the long driveway. I watched through the library camera as a man in a greasy canvas jacket walked into my mother's home. He did not look like an art appraiser from Christie's. He looked like a fence. He looked like the kind of man who bought things with rolls of cash and asked no questions about provenance. Marcus led him into the library. Everything must go, Marcus said, sweeping his arm across the room. I want the shelves cleared. I want the walls bare. What can you give me for the lot? I gripped the edge of the motel desk so hard my fingernails dug into the cheap laminate. On those shelves were my mother's first editions. There was a signed copy of To Kill a Mockingbird that she had treasured like a holy relic. There were leather-bound histories of the Pacific Northwest that my grandfather had collected. The man in the jacket pulled a book off the shelf. It was Harper Lee. He flipped it open, barely looking at the signature, treating it like a used paperback. $5,000 for the books, the man grunted, and I will take the gloves for another grand. $5,000, I whispered to the empty room, my voice trembling with rage. That collection is insured for $60,000. Done, Marcus said instantly. Take it all. I watched as they shoved the books into cardboard boxes. They didn't wrap them. They didn't protect the spines. They just threw them in like trash. Then they moved to the walls. My mother loved the Hudson River school style of painting. Over the fireplace hung an original oil painting of a storm breaking over a valley. It was the first piece of serious art she had bought when her business took off in the 90s. It represented her struggle and her triumph. Marcus helped the man lift it off the hook. Careful with the frame, Marcus said, not because he cared about the art, but because he wanted his money. That is a gold leaf. $2,000 for the painting, the man said. Make it $3. Marcus haggled weakly. $2,500, the man countered. Sold. I felt a physical sickness in my stomach. He was selling my memories for pocket change. He was stripping the house of its soul. In less than an hour. The library was barren. The shelves gaped like missing teeth. The walls were marked with rectangular ghosts where the paintings had hung. Marcus pocketed a thick envelope of cash, probably less than $10,000 total, for items worth 20 times that amount. He was liquidating my heritage to pay for his plane tickets and his first week of cocktails in Mexico. But the worst was yet to come. While Marcus was butchering the library, Sienna was upstairs. I switched the camera feed to the master bedroom. I had hesitated to watch this feed. It felt like a violation of my mother's sanctuary to see that woman in her space. But I needed evidence. I needed every single theft documented. Sienna was sitting at my mother's vanity table. The drawers of the jewelry armor were pulled out and dumped onto the velvet duvet. It was a glittering pile of gold, platinum, and gemstones. Sienna was not just stealing. She was auditioning. She held up my mother's diamond tennis bracelet, watching it catch the light. She slipped it onto her wrist. Then she picked up the sapphire pendant my father had given my mother for their 10th anniversary. She fastened it around her neck. She pulled out her phone. I watched on the screen as she tilted her head, pouting her lips, finding the perfect angle for a selfie. She snapped one, then another. She was preening. She was wearing a dead woman's treasures and feeling like a queen. I grabbed my own phone and opened the burner Instagram account I used to monitor them. I refreshed her profile. There it was, a new post, uploaded 30 seconds ago. The photo showed Sienna's hand resting on the steering wheel of my mother's Porsche, the diamond bracelet prominent on her wrist. The sapphire pendant was visible in the reflection of the rearview mirror. The caption read, "Manifesting abundance. A new chapter starts now. Blessed luxury life upgrade." Blessed, I hissed through my teeth. You are not blessed, Sienna. You are looting a grave. I took a screenshot of the post. Then I took a screenshot of the camera feed showing her taking the items from the house. I created a new folder on my drive labeled Grand Larceny. By the time the police saw this, she wouldn't just be an accessory to fraud. She would be facing charges for theft of property valued over $100,000. I wanted to drive over there. I wanted to smash through the front door and tear that necklace off her throat. I wanted to scream at Marcus until he crumbled. The urge to intervene was a burning fire in my blood, but I forced myself to stay in the chair. I forced myself to watch. Intervening now would save the furniture. But it would lose the war. If I stopped them now, they might face theft charges. But Marcus would wiggle out. He would claim he had the right to sell marital assets. It would be messy. No, I needed the big kill. I needed the wire fraud. I needed the eviction. To get that, I had to let them strip the house bare. I had to let them believe they were untouchable. Thursday dragged on. The house grew emptier. The white van returned twice, taking the antique dining chairs and the silver service. By Thursday evening, the cliffside looked less like a home and more like a crime scene. At 6 o'clock, Marcus's phone rang. I turned up the volume on the library feed. He was sitting on the floor, the chair was gone now, leaning against the bare wall. "Yeah," Marcus answered, his voice tight. "Do not yeah me, Marcus." A deep, distorted voice came through the speaker. It was the loan shark. "It is Thursday night. My associates are getting restless. They are wondering if they need to pay you a visit." "No," Marcus shouted, scrambling to his feet. "No visits. It is done. I have the buyer. The contract is signed. I sent you a copy of the purchase agreement. Didn't I look at your email?" "I saw the paper," the voice said, unimpressed. "Paper burns. I want the wire." "Tomorrow," Marcus pleaded. "The closing is at 10 in the morning. It is a cash deal. The wire hits my account by 11. I will transfer your $6 million by noon. I swear on my life." "You are swearing on your life, Marcus," the voice said. "That is exactly what you are doing. Noon. If the funds are not in our account by 12:01, my men come through the front door, and they won't be there to move furniture." The line went dead. Marcus stood there, shaking. He wiped sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "Did you hear that?" Sienna asked, walking into the room. She was wearing my mother's silk robe now. "Is everything okay?" "It is fine," Marcus snapped, though his voice was an octave too high. "He is just rattling his saber. We are closing tomorrow. We are fine." He began to pace the room, his eyes darting around the empty shelves. He looked like a caged animal. The stress was eating him alive. He needed to vent, to destroy something, to exert some control over his crumbling world. He stopped in front of the bookshelf where Great Expectations used to be. The books were gone, so the shelf was bare, exposing the wood grain at the back. And then he froze. He leaned in closer. He squinted. My heart stopped. The camera I had hidden in the spine of the book had been pulled out when the fence took the volume, but I had another one tucked into the molding of the shelf itself. It was tiny, barely a black dot. But with the books gone, it was exposed. Marcus reached out and touched it. "What is this?" he muttered. He pulled at the tiny wire. The lens came loose. He held it up to the light, staring at it with widening eyes. "A camera," he whispered. Then he roared. "A camera. She is watching us." Sienna screamed. "What, where?" "Here," Marcus yelled, ripping the wire out of the wall. "That little witch. She bugged the house." I watched on the screen as his face filled the frame. Distorted by extreme close-ups, his eyes were bloodshot, filled with a terrifying mix of paranoia and rage. "You think you are clever. Camille," he shouted directly into the lens. "You think you can spy on me." He threw the camera onto the hardwood floor. I heard the crunch of plastic and glass. Then, he grabbed a heavy brass candlestick, one of the few things the fence hadn't taken, and brought it down on the device. Smash. The video feed from camera 2 went black. "Got you," I heard him say through the audio feed. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had he found the others, if he searched the house and found the entire network, he might realize how deep the surveillance went. He might realize I knew everything. I held my breath, listening to the audio. "Are there more?" Sienna asked, her voice trembling. "Help me look," Marcus ordered. I heard them tearing through the room. They pulled the remaining cushions off the sofa. They looked behind the curtains. They checked the light fixtures. 10 minutes passed. I sat in the motel room, sweating. "Nothing," Marcus said finally, panting from exertion. "It was just the one. She probably put it there when she was grabbing her junk the other day. Amateur." I let out a long, slow breath. He hadn't found the one in the ceiling molding, and he hadn't found the primary audio bug under the desk. He laughed then. It was a triumphant, arrogant sound. "She thought she could catch me. Well, the joke is on her. I smashed her little toy. Now she is blind." "Are you sure?" Sienna asked. "I am sure," Marcus said. "We are ghosts, baby, totally off the grid. She won't see a thing tomorrow. She won't know the house is sold until we are sipping margaritas on the beach." I smiled in the darkness. He thought he had blinded me. He thought destroying one lens meant he had severed the connection. He was so confident in his own cleverness that he stopped looking. "Go pack the rest of the bags, Sienna," Marcus said. "We leave for the airport directly from the closing." The feed went silent as they left the room. But the audio remained live, picking up the hum of the refrigerator in the next room and the distant sound of the ocean. I checked the time. It was 11 at night. I couldn't sleep. The adrenaline was a living thing under my skin. I needed to see it. I needed to say goodbye. I put on my coat and walked out to my car. The rain had started again, a soft, misty Seattle drizzle that blurred the streetlights. I drove the winding coastal road, the rhythm of the windshield wipers matching the beating of my heart. I pulled up 100 yards down the street from the cliffside, cutting the engine and the lights. The house loomed on the cliff edge, a dark silhouette against the charcoal sky. Most of the windows were dark. The house looked stripped, abandoned, but there was a light on in the master bedroom. My mother's room. I sat there in the rain, gripping the steering wheel. I thought about the woman who had built that house. I thought about the nights we spent cooking in that kitchen, the holidays we celebrated in that dining room. I thought about how she had worked for 40 years to build a legacy, only to have a parasite try to consume it in a week. Marcus was in there right now, sleeping in her bed, dreaming of his millions. He thought he had won. He thought he had erased us. I rolled down the window, letting the cold sea air fill the car. It smelled of salt and pine and memories. "Sleep well, Marcus," I whispered into the night. "Enjoy your last night in bed, because where you are going, the mattresses are made of steel." I looked up at the window one last time. "I promised you, Mom," I said softly, my voice catching in my throat. "I promised I would take care of it. Tomorrow, I will keep that promise." I rolled up the window and started the car. The engine purred to life, a low growl in the quiet street. I turned the car around and drove back toward the city. The waiting was over. The assets were liquidated. The contract was drafted. The trap was sprung. Tomorrow was Friday. Tomorrow was the closing. And tomorrow, Marcus Thorne was going to learn that the most dangerous thing in the world is not a lone shark with a baseball bat. It is a daughter with a plan. Friday morning arrived wrapped in a shroud of gray mist, the kind that clings to the skyscrapers of downtown Seattle like a damp sweater. The city looked melancholy, but inside the offices of Sterling Title on the 42nd floor, the atmosphere was hermetically sealed against the gloom. Here, the air was scented with expensive filtered oxygen and the subtle, leathery fragrance of old money. The carpet was so thick it silenced footsteps, and the silence was heavy, broken only by the polite murmuring of receptionists and the distant ring of phones handling millions of dollars in transactions. I was already there. I was sitting in a small, darkened observation room adjoining the main conference suite. A large pane of glass separated me from the room where the closing would take place. From my side, it was a window. From their side, it was a mirror, reflecting their own greed back at them. I adjusted the volume on the console in front of me, ensuring the audio feed was crisp. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. I was not nervous. I was cold. I felt like a surgeon scrubbing in for an amputation. At 9:55, the heavy double doors of the conference room opened. Marcus Thorne walked in. He was wearing an Armani suit, a charcoal gray three-piece number that shimmered slightly under the recessed lighting. I recognized it immediately. He had charged it to my mother's Platinum American Express card 3 years ago for their anniversary dinner. Back then, it had fit him perfectly. Now, the buttons of the vest were straining against the bloat of cheap whiskey and 6 months of high-stakes stress. He looked expansive, taking up space, trying to project the image of a titan of industry, but I saw the telltale signs. I saw the sheen of sweat on his forehead that he kept wiping away with the back of his hand. I saw the way his eyes darted around the room, checking the corners, checking the exits, checking for threats. Trailing behind him was Sienna. She looked completely out of place in the understated elegance of the law firm. She was wearing a bright red dress that was too tight and too short. And she was draped in my mother's jewelry. The sapphire pendant rested in the hollow of her throat, and the diamond tennis bracelet glittered on her wrist as she clutched a designer handbag that I knew for a fact contained the stolen silver from the dining room. She was looking around with wide, hungry eyes, assessing the cost of the furniture, the view, the sheer proximity to wealth. David, the senior litigator posing as the representative for Aurora Holdings, stood up from the head of the long mahogany table. He was perfect for the role. He wore a navy suit that cost more than Marcus's car, and he had the bored, efficient demeanor of a man who bought skyscrapers before breakfast. "Mr. Thorne," David said, extending a hand. "I am David Henderson. We spoke on the phone. Thank you for accommodating our expedited timeline." "Pleasure," Marcus said, his voice booming a little too loudly in the quiet room. He shook David's hand with a grip that was likely too firm, overcompensating. "This is my associate, Sienna." "Charmed," David said. Barely glancing at her, he gestured to the leather chairs opposite him. "Please, sit. We have a lot of paperwork to get through, and my client is eager to close the tax exchange loop by noon." Marcus sat down. He placed his briefcase on the table, a battered leather thing that looked shabby against the polished wood. He drummed his fingers on the surface. Tap, tap, tap. The sound echoed in my observation booth. "So," Marcus said, trying to sound casual but failing, "is everything in order? The funds?" David smiled, a thin professional expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Straight to business. I like that." David turned his laptop around so the screen faced Marcus. "As you can see," David said, pointing to the display, "we have the wire transfer queued in our escrow portal. The amount is locked." I leaned forward in my chair. Watching Marcus's face through the glass, the screen showed a bank interface. The numbers were bold and black against a white background, $7,200,000. Status, pending authorization. Marcus made a noise. It was a small, involuntary sound, like a whimper of pure want. His eyes widened, fixing on those zeros as if they were a religious vision. He stopped breathing for a second. That number represented his salvation. It was the difference between life and death. It was his ticket to Mexico, his freedom from the loan sharks, his victory over me. Sienna leaned in, gasping. "Oh my God, Marcus, look at it." "I see it," Marcus whispered. He looked up at David, licking his lips. "When does it hit my account?" "The moment the deed is signed and notarized," David explained calmly. "We upload the confirmation to the bank, and the wire is released instantly. You will have the funds before you leave the building." Marcus let out a long, shaky exhale. He reached for the bottle of sparkling water on the table, his hand trembling so badly the water sloshed against the glass. He took a gulp, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Excellent," Marcus said. "Let's sign. I have a plane to catch." "Of course," David said. He slid a stack of documents across the table. It was a mountain of paper, easily 3 inches thick. Standard commercial purchase agreement, disclosures, title transfer, warranty deeds. I trust you have reviewed the terms." Yes, Marcus lied. He hadn't read a word. He just wanted the money. "Very well," David said. He opened a folder and pulled out the primary document, the grant deed. He placed it in front of Marcus. Then, David paused. He took off his reading glasses and looked Marcus dead in the eye. This was the moment. This was the legal trap. We needed him to lie on the record, in front of witnesses, just moments before committing the fraud. "Before you sign, Mr. Thorne," David said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming serious and heavy. "I need to ask you a few standard compliance questions. Aurora Holdings is very strict about title clearance." "Ask away," Marcus said, clicking a heavy gold pen he had pulled from his pocket. "You are the sole owner of the property known as the Cliffside, located at 1242 Ocean View Drive?" David asked. "I am," Marcus said. "I inherited it from my late wife. And there are no other claims to the title, David pressed. No liens, no mortgages, no other beneficiaries. None, Marcus said. The title is clean. David nodded slowly. Our background check indicated your late wife had a daughter, Miss Camille Fairmont. Does she have any interest in the estate? Any claim to residency or ownership? I watched Marcus. This was his chance. He could tell the truth. He could say, well, there is a complicated life estate situation. If he said that, the deal would die. But he wouldn't go to federal prison for fraud. He would just be a broke man with a house he couldn't sell. Marcus didn't hesitate. He didn't even blink. He sneered, a look of utter contempt crossing his face. Camille, no. God, no. The girl is troubled. Troubled? David asked, raising an eyebrow. Drugs, Marcus whispered conspiratorially, leaning in. Very sad. She has been in and out of rehab for years. My wife cut her out of the will completely to stop her from buying heroin. She signed a waiver months ago. She has absolutely no rights to the property. She is probably sleeping under a bridge somewhere by now. I sat in the dark room, my hands clenched into fists. He wasn't content with stealing my home. He had to destroy my reputation, my character, my memory. He had to paint me as a junkie to justify his theft. I see, David said. That is unfortunate. It is, Marcus sighed, shaking his head with fake sorrow. But that is why I need to sell. Too many bad memories in that house. I need a fresh start. Well then, David said, tapping the signature line on the deed. Let's give you that fresh start. Sign here, and initial here. This states that you are the fee simple owner and you are conveying full, unencumbered title to Aurora Holdings. Marcus gripped the pen. He looked at the paper. In his mind, he was signing a receipt for $7,200,000. In reality, he was signing a confession. He was documenting, in ink, that he was selling something he did not own. That was federal wire fraud. That was perjury. But more importantly, in the eyes of my mother's will, he was signing his own eviction. Clause 7. I recited it in my head as he lowered the pen. Any attempt to sell shall be considered a repudiation of this gift, immediately voiding the life estate. The tip of the pen touched the paper. Scritch, scratch. The sound was amplified by the microphone. It sounded loud, harsh, irreversible, like the sound of a guillotine blade dropping. Marcus signed his name with a flourish. Marcus Thorne. He flipped the page. He signed again and again. He was moving fast, terrified that the offer might be withdrawn if he took too long. He signed the bill of sale. He signed the title transfer. He signed the affidavit of sole ownership. With every signature, he dug the hole deeper. With every stroke of the pen, he stripped himself of another layer of protection. He finished the last page and slammed the pen down on the table. Done, Marcus said, grinning. He looked at Sienna. It is done. Baby, Sienna squealed and clapped her hands. We are rich. David pulled the documents back across the table. He checked the signatures carefully. He picked up a notary stamp from his side of the table. David was a licensed notary, which made this all official. Thump, he stamped the deed. Thump, he stamped the bill of sale. It is official, David said, closing the folder. The property is sold. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Exhaling a breath he seemed to have been holding for days. He loosened his tie. The wire? My associate is initiating it now, David said, typing on his laptop. 7.2 million, Marcus murmured, his eyes glazing over. Send it. Transfer initiated, David said. On the screen facing Marcus, the status changed from pending to processing. Marcus closed his eyes, a look of pure ecstasy on his face. He had won. He had beaten the odds. He had beaten the loan sharks. He had beaten me. Thank you, Mr. Henderson, Marcus said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. You have been a pleasure to deal with, truly. Please, sit down. Mr. Thorne, David said, His voice had changed. The smooth corporate warmth was gone. It was replaced by something cold and hard. "Excuse me," Marcus asked, confused. "We have a plane to catch. If the wire is sent—" "The wire is processing," David said, not looking up from his screen. "But there is one final piece of business before you leave." "What business?" Marcus demanded, his smile fading. "I signed everything." "You signed the deed," David said. "But we need to discuss the keys." "The keys are in the briefcase," Marcus said. Irritated, he pointed to the leather bag. "Garage openers, front door, gate codes, it is all there." "Not those keys," David said. He looked up, and for the first time, he looked at the mirror. He looked right at me. "The keys to your future, Marcus," David said. At that moment, I reached out and pressed the button on the console that controlled the door between the observation room and the conference room. Click. The lock disengaged. I stood up. I smoothed the skirt of my black dress, a structured, severe piece by Givenchy that I had bought yesterday. It was a power suit, armor for the modern woman. I picked up the file folder containing the real will and the video evidence. I pushed the door open. Marcus turned at the sound. His eyes widened. His jaw dropped. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like he had been slapped. "Camille," he choked out. I walked into the room. I didn't look at Sienna. I didn't look at David. I looked only at him. "Hello, Marcus?" I said. My voice was calm, steady, and terrifyingly polite. "I believe you have something of mine." "What? What are you doing here?" Marcus stammered, backing away until his legs hit the chair. "I told you to leave. You are trespassing. I just sold this building. I mean, this house." "Yes," I said, placing the folder on the table right next to the wet ink of his signature. "You did sell it. Or rather, you tried to." "Tried." Marcus laughed nervously, looking at David for support. "Mr. Henderson, tell her the deal is done. The wire is sent." "The wire is frozen." "Mr. Thorne," David said, closing his laptop with a snap. "Frozen," Marcus screamed. "What do you mean, frozen?" "I mean," I said, stepping closer to him, "that you cannot sell what you do not own." "I own it," Marcus yelled, his voice cracking. "I have the will. I have the codicil." "You have a forgery," I said, "and we have a video of you practicing it." Marcus went still. He looked like a statue of a man realizing he was standing in quicksand. "And even if the will was real," I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper that echoed in the silent room, "you still don't own the house. You never did." I opened the folder and pulled out the original will, flipping to the highlighted page. Clause 7B, I read. "The life estate. You had the right to live there. Marcus, just to live. But the moment you signed that paper—" I pointed to the deed he had just executed. "You evicted yourself." Marcus stared at the paper. He stared at me. The arrogance was gone. The greed was gone. All that was left was the hollow, terrifying realization that he had walked into a room with $7 million, and he was about to leave with handcuffs. "Happy closing day, stepfather," I said. The silence that followed my greeting was absolute. A vacuum where the air had been sucked out of the room. Marcus stood frozen, his hand still hovering near the documents he had just signed. His face a mask of confusion that was rapidly curdling into anger. He looked at me, then at David Henderson, and finally at the open door behind me where Arthur Vance stood flanked by two men in nondescript dark suits. They were not lawyers. They did not have the polished, soft look of corporate retainers. They had the hard, watchful stillness of predators. They were federal agents. Marcus decided to play the only card he had left, rage. "What the hell is this?" he bellowed, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and bravado. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "I told you to get out. You have no business here. I just sold this house. It is done. I am the owner. And I am ordering you to leave." He turned to David, his eyes wild. Mr. Henderson, call security. Get this hysterical woman out of here before she ruins our deal." David did not move. He did not call security. He simply folded his hands on the table and looked at Marcus with a detached, clinical curiosity. "I cannot do that. Mr. Thorne," David said calmly. "Why not?" Marcus screamed, slamming his hand on the table. "You bought the house. It is your property now." "No, Marcus," I said, stepping fully into the room and walking toward the table. My heels clicked rhythmically on the hardwood floor, a steady beat of approaching judgment. "He didn't buy the house, and you didn't sell it. You just signed a confession." I reached the table and dropped the heavy file folder I was carrying onto the polished wood. It landed with a dull, heavy thud that seemed to echo in the room. "Confession," Marcus sputtered, sweat now streaming freely down his face, ruining the collar of his expensive shirt. "I signed a deed. I signed a bill of sale. I have $7,200,000 coming to me." "You have nothing coming to you," Arthur Vance said. Stepping forward, his voice was deep, authoritative, the voice of a man who had spent 50 years in courtrooms destroying men like Marcus. Except perhaps a court-appointed attorney. Marcus stared at Arthur. "Vance, what are you doing here? You represent the estate." "Exactly," Arthur said, adjusting his glasses. "I represent the estate, and right now, the estate is the victim of a massive, clumsy fraud attempted by you." "Fraud," Marcus laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "I am the husband. I have the codicil. Valerie left it all to me." "We know about the codicil. Marcus," I said softly. "We know you practiced the signature for 2 weeks. We know you paid a notary named Greg $5,000 to backdate it. We have the video. We have the audio. It is all in the cloud, and it is all on the desk of the United States Attorney." Marcus went pale, his eyes darting to the observation mirror, realizing he had been watched. That is illegal surveillance. You can't use that." "We can argue about admissibility in court," Arthur interjected. "But that is not your biggest problem right now. Your biggest problem is the document you just signed." Arthur reached out and tapped the deed Marcus had executed moments ago. "You see, Marcus," Arthur continued, his tone lecture-like, "even if we ignore the forgery, which we won't, you still walked into a trap. Valerie knew you. She knew you would eventually try to cash out. So, in her original, valid will, she left you a life estate." "I know," Marcus shouted. "That means I own it for life. It means you have the right to live there." I corrected him. "Not to own it, not to sell it. It is a shelter. Not an asset, but there was a condition, a poison pill clause." I opened the folder on the table and pointed to the highlighted text. "Clause 7B, I read aloud, looking him dead in the eye. "Any attempt by the life tenant to sell, mortgage, or transfer the title shall be considered a repudiation of the gift. The moment you attempt to sell, the life estate is voided, instantly." I leaned closer. "Do you understand what that means? Marcus, 5 minutes ago, you had a home, you had a roof over your head for the rest of your life, but the second you put your pen to that paper and signed your name to sell it, you legally evicted yourself. You are not the owner anymore. You are not even a tenant. You are a trespasser." Marcus looked down at his own signature. He looked at the ink that was still drying. He realized that with every stroke of that pen, he hadn't been securing his freedom. He had been signing away his only safety net. "No," he whispered. "No, that is a trick." "It is the law," Arthur said. "You are homeless. Mr. Thorne, effective immediately. But the money—" Marcus grasped at the last straw. He turned to David. "The wire? It said, 'Processing, you owe me $7 million. One of the men in the dark suit stepped forward. He flipped open a badge wallet. A gold shield gleamed under the conference room lights. "Special Agent Miller, FBI," the man said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Mr. Thorne, You just attempted to sell a property you do not own to a corporate entity using an interstate wire transfer. That is wire fraud. It is a federal crime, and since the amount exceeds $1 million, you are looking at a mandatory minimum sentence. The buyer? Marcus pointed at David. He is real Aurora Holdings. Aurora Holdings is a shell corporation set up by Mr. Vance, Special Agent Miller explained. There is no buyer. There is no money. The wire transfer interface you saw was a simulation. This was a controlled delivery operation to secure evidence of your intent to defraud. The room spun. I could see it in Marcus's eyes. The floor was falling out from under him. The $7 million was smoke. The house was gone. The plane tickets to Mexico were useless. You set me up, Marcus rasped, his voice barely audible. He looked at me with pure hatred. You bitch, you set me up. I gave you a choice, I said coldly. If you had just lived in the house, if you had just been a grieving husband, you would have been fine, but you got greedy. You wanted to sell my mother's legacy to pay off your gambling debts. I didn't make you sign that paper. Marcus, you ran to the table to sign it. A movement in the corner of my eye caught my attention. Sienna. She had been standing by the window, frozen in shock. But as the reality of the situation sank in no money, no Mexico, FBI agents in the room, her survival instinct kicked in. She began to inch toward the door, clutching her designer handbag, trying to make herself invisible. Going somewhere. Sienna? I asked. She froze, her hand on the doorknob. She turned to look at me, her face a mask of fake innocence. I didn't sign anything. This has nothing to do with me. I am just the girlfriend. I am leaving. You are not leaving, I said. I walked over to her. She was taller than me in her heels, but she shrank back as I approached. You are an accessory to conspiracy, I said. You were in the room when the forgery was planned. We have you on tape, but that is for the lawyers to figure out later. Right now, I am interested in something else. I pointed to her neck. That sapphire pendant. It belonged to my mother. Sienna's hand flew to her throat, covering the jewel. Marcus gave this to me. It is a gift. It is stolen property, I said. And the diamond bracelet on your wrist, and the silver in that handbag, and the Rolex on Marcus's arm. I didn't know, she stammered, tears welling up in her eyes, fake tears, just like Marcus's at the funeral. He told me they were his. Take them off, I ordered. My voice was not loud, but it was absolute. Take them off right now, or Agent Miller will add possession of stolen goods to your arrest warrant. And trust me, they don't let you keep jewelry in federal holding. Sienna looked at the agents. Agent Miller nodded once, a grim confirmation. Trembling, she reached behind her neck and unclasped the pendant. She dropped it into my outstretched hand. It felt warm from her skin, which made my stomach turn. But having it back felt like reclaiming a piece of my mother's soul. She slid the bracelet off her wrist. She handed over the handbag. The ring, too, I said, pointing to a diamond solitaire on her finger that I recognized as my grandmother's engagement ring. She sobbed as she pulled it off. I have nothing, she wailed. He promised me we were going to be rich. He lied, I said, dropping the jewelry into my pocket. Get used to it. Marcus had collapsed into the leather chair. He looked small. The bluster was gone. He was staring at the table, his mouth moving silently. He looked like a man who had woken up from a dream to find himself in a nightmare. My debt, he whispered. The deadline. And then, as if on cue, a sound cut through the tension of the room. Brr-ing, brr-ing. It was Marcus's cell phone. Sitting on the table next to the unsigned check, every head in the room turned to look at it. The screen lit up. The caller ID didn't show a name, just a string of scrambled numbers. But we all knew who it was. It was 12 o'clock, noon, the deadline. Marcus stared at the phone as if it were a bomb. His face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. He knew who was on the other end. It wasn't the FBI. It wasn't a lawyer. It was Obsidian Ventures. It was the men who had promised to collect in flesh. Burring, burring. Answer it, Marcus, I said softly. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a terror that transcended legal consequences. This was primal fear. I can't, he choked out. I don't have the money. They are going to kill me. They might try, I said. But ironically, the only people who can save you right now are the ones standing behind you. I nodded at the FBI agents. You have two choices, Marcus, I said. You can walk out that door right now as a free man. You are homeless, you are broke, and you have $6 million in debt to a violent criminal syndicate that is probably parking a van outside the building right now. Or, I paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. Or you can let Agent Miller put those handcuffs on you. You go to federal prison. It is not the Ritz, but it has walls, it has guards, and it is very hard for a loan shark to break into. Prison is the only safe house you have left. The phone stopped ringing. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. Then, a text message alert pinged. Marcus looked at the screen. He didn't read it aloud, but I saw his throat work as he swallowed a scream. The color drained from his lips. He stood up slowly. He held out his hands to Agent Miller. His wrists were together, palms open in surrender. "Arrest me," Marcus whispered. Tears were streaming down his face now, real tears of abject terror. "Please, take me into custody. Right now. Don't let me go out there." Agent Miller stepped forward. He pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. Click, click. The sound was sharp and final. "Marcus Thorne," Agent Miller recited, "you are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." I watched as the metal bit into his wrists. I watched as the arrogance finally died, replaced by the pathetic gratitude of a man who realized that a prison cell was his only sanctuary. He looked at me one last time as they began to lead him away. "You planned this," he said, his voice shaking. "You knew about the debt. You knew I would have to choose jail." "I didn't choose for you, Marcus," I said, clutching my mother's necklace in my pocket. "I just made sure you had no other options." As they marched him out the door, passing the weeping Sienna who was being detained by the second agent, I looked down at the table. The sold deed lay there, a testament to his greed. I picked up the pen he had used, the heavy gold pen. I capped it. "Mr. Henderson," I said to David, who was busy gathering the files. "You can cancel the fake wire." "Already done," David said with a wink. I turned to Arthur Vance. The old lawyer was smiling, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. "Well, Camille," Arthur said, "that was effective. The house is yours. The title is clear. The life estate is extinguished." "Not just the house. Arthur," I said, walking to the window and looking out at the city of Seattle below, where the rain was finally starting to clear. "My life. I got my life back. But the story wasn't quite over. Marcus was in cuffs. Yes, but I still had a house to clean, and a few loose ends to tie up." I watched the black SUV below as the agents led Marcus into the back seat. I saw another car, a dark sedan with tinted windows, pull away from the curb and disappear into traffic. The sharks had seen the feds. They would back off. Marcus was safe, in a cage of his own making. I turned back to the room. "Let's go home. Arthur, I have to feed the cat." The metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting tight around Marcus's wrists was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a sharp, mechanical punctuation mark that ended the sentence of his life as he knew it. But if I thought his surrender to the FBI agents would be dignified, I was dead wrong. The moment the steel bit into his skin, the reality of his situation fractured his mind. The paralyzing terror of the loan sharks receded just enough for his narcissism to come roaring back, ugly and defensive. "You did this," Marcus screamed, twisting his body to glare at me, spit flying from his lips. He tried to lunge, but Agent Miller held him firm with a grip of iron. "You ungrateful," Spiteful little brat. After everything I did for your mother, after I took care of her, this is how you repay me. You entrap me." "I didn't entrap you, Marcus," I said, standing my ground. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I watched him writhe like a worm on a hook. Entrapment is when the police coerce you into committing a crime you wouldn't have committed otherwise. Nobody forced you to forge that codicil. Nobody forced you to list the house on the black market, and nobody forced you to sign that deed. You did all of that on your own. "I was protecting the estate," he bellowed, his face turning a mottled purple. "I was trying to save us from ruin, and you lied. You brought in these actors." He jerked his head toward David Henderson. "We are not actors, Mr. Thorne," David said, his voice dripping with disdain. He began to pack up the files on the table, treating them with the reverence of Holy Scripture. "We are the consequences of your actions." Marcus pulled against the cuffs, the chains rattling. "She is the criminal here. She hacked my house. She spied on me. Arrest her." Agent Miller tightened his grip on Marcus's arm, forcing him to bend forward slightly. "Mr. Thorne, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. You are digging yourself a deeper hole with every word." But Marcus couldn't stop. He looked at me with eyes that were black pits of hatred. "I should have thrown you out onto the street the day your mother got sick. I should have locked you out and let you rot. You are a snake. Camille, a cold-hearted snake." I walked up to him. I moved into his personal space, close enough to smell the sour reek of his fear sweat and the stale whiskey seeping from his pores. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. He was powerless. He was just a man in bracelets. I leaned in and whispered, my voice soft so only he could hear. It was intimate, almost like a lover's secret, but the words were razor blades. "I am not a snake, Marcus. I am a mirror. I didn't trick you. I just showed you exactly what you wanted to see. You wanted a quick sale. I gave you the quickest one in history. You wanted a cash buyer who didn't ask questions. I gave you one. You wanted to believe you were smarter than everyone else in the room. I let you believe it. It wasn't me who destroyed you. It was your own greed. Your greed was the only bait I needed. You swallowed it whole, hook, line, and sinker." I pulled back and looked him in the eye. "My mother didn't leave you nothing, Marcus. She left you at home. She gave you a life estate. You could have lived at the cliffside until you died of old age. You threw it away for a gamble, and now you don't have a home. You have a cell number." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The truth of it, the absolute, crushing weight of his own stupidity finally hit him. He slumped in the agent's grip, a puppet whose strings had been cut. "Bag the evidence," Agent Miller commanded his partner. The second agent moved to the table. He picked up the grant deed, the document Marcus had signed with such triumphant flourishes only minutes ago. He slid it into a clear plastic evidence bag. "Be careful with that," Arthur Vance said from the corner of the room. "That isn't just a deed. That is proof of intent to commit wire fraud." He signed an affidavit stating he was the fee simple owner when he knew. Probably knew he held only a conditional life estate. That signature is a felony. "Understood. Counselor," the agent said, sealing the bag, the red tape stripped across the top, sealing Marcus's fate inside. Then, the agent turned his attention to Sienna. She was huddled in the corner near the ficus plant, trying to make herself look small. She was clutching her oversized designer handbag to her chest like a shield. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in black streaks, but her eyes were darting around the room, looking for an exit that didn't exist. "Ma'am," the agent said, approaching her. "I need you to hand over the bag." "No," Sienna whimpered, clutching it tighter. "It is my personal property. You can't take it. I need my lipstick." "Hand it over," the agent repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Or I will take it from you." She hesitated, then reluctantly held it out. The agent took the bag. It was heavy, much heavier than a purse containing lipstick and a wallet should be. He walked over to the conference table and upended the bag. The contents spilled out with a clatter that sounded like a discordant symphony of theft. First came the silver, heavy, sterling silver forks and spoons from my mother's grandmother, wrapped hastily in napkins. Then came the watches, 3 of them. Marcus's Patek Philippe, which my mother had bought him, and 2 vintage Rolexes that had belonged to my father. And then, the jewelry. It wasn't just the pieces she was wearing. It was a hoard, diamond earrings, a ruby brooch, a pearl choker. She had raided the safe. She had raided the jewelry box. She had stuffed every shimmering thing she could find into that bag, planning to pawn them the moment they landed in Mexico. "Well, well," the agent said, picking up a heavy platinum watch. "This looks like quite the travel kit." "I was holding them for him," Sienna shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Marcus. "He told me to pack them. He said they were his. I didn't steal anything. I am just the girlfriend." "You are in possession of stolen goods valued well over $50,000, the agent said, pulling a second pair of handcuffs from his belt. "And since you were crossing state lines with the intent to sell, that makes it a federal issue." "Marcus!" Sienna screamed as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. Tell them I didn't know." Marcus didn't even look at her. He was staring at the floor, lost in his own personal hell. "Get them out of here," Agent Miller said. As the agents began to steer Marcus and Sienna toward the door, Marcus dug his heels in. He stopped and looked back at David Henderson. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. "Wait," Marcus rasped. "The money, the wire. If I go to jail, does the money still go to the account? Can I use it for a lawyer?" It was pathetic. Even now, facing prison, he couldn't let go of the idea of the $7 million. It was the only thing that made sense to him. David Henderson stopped packing his briefcase. He looked at Marcus with a pitying smile. "Marcus," David said, his voice dropping the corporate persona entirely. "There is no money. There never was." "But I saw it," Marcus whispered. "On the screen, pending authorization." "It was a simulation," David said. "A graphic interface designed by the IT department at my law firm. I am not the director of acquisitions for Aurora Holdings. Aurora Holdings doesn't have a director of acquisitions. It is a filing cabinet in Delaware." "Then who are you?" Marcus asked, his voice breaking. "I am a senior partner at Vance & Associates," David said. "I work down the hall from Arthur. My specialty is corporate litigation, not investment. You weren't negotiating with a buyer, Marcus. You were negotiating with the prosecution." The color drained from Marcus's face until he looked like a corpse. The last shred of his reality had just evaporated. He hadn't just been caught. He had been played. The negotiation, the softening market, the price dropped to $7.2 million. It was all theater, and he had been the clown in the center ring. "Let's go," Agent Miller said, shoving Marcus forward. We followed them out. The procession moved through the plush, silent corridors of the law firm. Secretaries stopped typing to watch. Junior associates peered over their cubicle walls. Marcus Thorne, who had walked in here an hour ago strutting like a peacock in his Armani suit, was now being dragged out like common trash. We took the elevator down to the lobby. The silence in the metal box was suffocating. Sienna was sobbing quietly. Marcus was breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. When the doors opened on the ground floor, the lobby was bright and busy. People in suits were rushing to lunch. Couriers were delivering packages. They all stopped and stared as the 2 federal agents marched the handcuffed couple across the marble floor. I walked a few paces behind them, flanked by Arthur Vance. I held my head high. I felt no shame. The shame belonged entirely to the man in front of me. As we pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out onto the sidewalk, the cool Seattle air hit us. The rain had stopped, but the pavement was still wet and slick. A black government SUV was parked at the curb, its lights flashing silently. But that wasn't the only car waiting. Across the street, parked in a loading zone, was a dark sedan with tinted windows. It was idling. A man in a heavy coat was leaning against the hood, smoking a cigarette. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was looking right at the entrance of the building. I saw Marcus stiffen. He saw the man. He recognized him. It was one of the collectors from Obsidian Ventures. The man across the street took a long drag of his cigarette and locked eyes with Marcus. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just stared with the dead, shark-like gaze of a predator who has been cheated out of a meal. Marcus let out a whimper. He practically threw himself toward the open door of the police SUV. "Get me in," Marcus begged the agent, trying to climb into the back seat before he was even told to. "Please, just get me inside. Take me to the station. Take me to a federal holding. Anywhere. Just drive." He wasn't fighting the arrest anymore. He was embracing it. He realized in that moment that the handcuffs weren't just restraints. They were protection. As long as he was in federal custody, the loan sharks couldn't touch him. The concrete walls of a prison cell were the only thing standing between him and a shallow grave in the woods. Agent Miller pushed Marcus's head down to clear the doorframe and slammed the door shut. I watched through the window as Marcus slumped against the seat, closing his eyes. He looked broken. He looked old. Sienna was loaded into the other side. She was still crying about her handbag. Arthur Vance stood next to me on the sidewalk, watching the SUV pull away into traffic. "What happens to him now?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "He will be arraigned tomorrow," Arthur said, his voice calm and factual. "The bail will be set astronomically high given the flight risk and the nature of the fraud. He won't be able to pay it. He will stay in detention until trial." "And the sentence?" I asked. "For this." Arthur whistled low. "Wire fraud involving over $1 million, attempted bank fraud, identity theft regarding the forgery, violation of a fiduciary duty, and that is just the federal charges. The state will want a piece of him for the forgery too. I would say he is looking at 15 years, minimum. And given his previous debts and the people he owes money to, he will probably ask for protective custody. He will spend the next decade and a half in a 6x8 cell. Looking over his shoulder, 15 years, I repeated. He will be almost 70 when he gets out. If he gets out, Arthur noted. Prison is hard on men who have lived soft lives. I looked across the street. The dark sedan was still there. The man in the coat watched the police car disappear around the corner. Then, he dropped his cigarette on the wet pavement and crushed it under his boot. He got back into the car and drove away slowly. They knew Marcus was out of reach. For now. But debts like that don't just vanish. They wait. "He is safe from them in there," I said. "Safe is a relative term," Arthur replied. "He is alive. That is more than he deserves." I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean, damp air. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for 6 months, the grief, the anger, the helplessness was suddenly gone. It was replaced by a strange, hollow quiet. It wasn't joy. It wasn't happiness. It was a relief. Deep, bone-settling relief. "It is over," I whispered. "The legal part is over," Arthur corrected gently. "Now comes the hard part." "What is that?" "Now you have to go back to that empty house and decide who Camille Fairmont is when she isn't fighting a war." I smiled a small, tired smile. "I think Camille Fairmont is someone who needs a very long nap. And maybe a glass of that vintage scotch he didn't manage to drink," Arthur suggested. "Definitely that," I agreed. The police lights had faded into the distance. The street was just a street again. The business of the city went on around us, indifferent to the drama that had just played out. "Come on," Arthur said, offering me his arm. "I will drive you back to your car. You have a cat to feed." "Yes," I said, taking his arm. "And I have a lock to change. Again." We walked down the street, away from the scene of the crime. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The image of Marcus's face as the handcuffs clicked shut was burned into my memory forever. It was a dark, ugly memory. But it was also a shield. I knew now what I was capable of. I knew that I wasn't just a victim. I was a survivor, and God help anyone who tried to take my home again. The drive back to the cliffside was the quietest journey of my life. The rain had finally stopped. leaving the world scrubbed clean and glistening under a pail. Breaking sun. I drove alone. Arthur had offered to come with me, but I had told him I needed to do this part by myself. This was the reclamation. And it was a solitary act. When I turned onto the winding driveway, the house rose up against the backdrop of the Pacific Ocean like a sentinel that had survived a siege. For the last week, every time I looked at this structure, I had felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. I had seen it as a battlefield, a prize to be fought over, a vessel for Marcus's greed. But today, as I parked my sedan next to the empty spot where the Porsche used to be, the house looked different. It looked tired. It looked like it had been holding its breath, waiting for the infection to be cut out. I walked up to the front door. The brass kickplate was tarnished from the salt air, and the welcome mat was crooked. I didn't reach for a key. Marcus had changed the locks to keep me out, but he hadn't realized that locks work both ways. I reached into my bag and pulled out the box I had picked up from the hardware store on the way over. It was a high-end biometric security system, the kind used in government buildings. I spent the next hour sitting on the front porch with a screwdriver and a drill. I removed the mechanism Marcus had installed. I stripped out the tumblers and the deadbolt. I replaced them with solid steel and a scanner that would only respond to me. When the green light finally flashed and the heavy bolt slid into place with a reassuring thunk, I felt the first true wave of relief wash over me. No more keys to be stolen, no more codes to be guessed. The house would now only open for the blood of a Fairmont. I pressed my thumb against the scanner. Access granted. The door swung open. I stepped inside. The silence of the house was profound. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a library. It was the hollow, echoing silence of a looted tomb. The air was stale, thick with the lingering scent of Marcus's cheap musk and the cloying, floral perfume Sienna had drenched herself in. It smelled like betrayal. I walked into the living room. It was shocking to see it so bare. The Persian rugs were gone, revealing the hardwood floors underneath which were pale where the sun hadn't touched them for decades. The velvet armchairs where my mother used to sit and drink her morning tea were gone. The silver candlesticks, the crystal vases, the antique clock that had chimed every hour of my childhood all gone. It should have been heartbreaking, and in a way, it was. But as I stood there in the center of the empty room, I realized that Marcus had done me a favor. He had stripped away the furniture, but he hadn't taken the house, the bones of the place, the high ceilings, the crown molding, the massive windows framing the gray ocean were still here. He had taken the things, but he couldn't take the soul of the place. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows. They were locked tight, trapping the bad air inside. I unlocked them one by one. I threw them open, pushing the glass panes wide until they hit the stops. The wind roared in. It was cold and salty, carrying the sound of crashing waves and the cry of seagulls. It swirled through the room, chasing out the stagnation, blowing away the invisible residue of the people who had tried to steal this life from me. I stood in the draft, letting the cold air bite my cheeks, feeling it cleanse the space. "Get out," I whispered to the empty air. "You are gone. You are never coming back." Then I remembered. "Oliver," I called out. My voice echoed in the empty hallway. I felt a sudden spike of panic. What if they had let him out? What if they had kicked him out into the rain? "Oliver!" I yelled louder, running toward the kitchen. The kitchen was empty. The pantry door was open. I checked the laundry room. Nothing. I ran to the staircase. Underneath the main stairs, there was a small, dark crawl space where we used to store holiday decorations. It was Oliver's favorite hiding spot during thunderstorms. I knelt on the floor and peered into the darkness. 2 glowing green eyes blinked back at me. "Oh, buddy," I breathed, tears pricking my eyes. "You are okay." He let out a low, shaky meow, but didn't move. He was traumatized. He had spent days listening to strangers tear apart his home, listening to Marcus screaming. I reached in, moving slowly. "It is me, Oliver. It is Camille. The bad man is gone. He is gone forever." I touched his fur. He flinched, then leaned into my hand. I scooped him up, pulling his heavy, warm body against my chest. He buried his face in my neck, his purr starting up like a rusty engine. I sat there on the floor for a long time, just holding him, rocking back and forth. He was the only living thing left in this house besides me. He was the last heartbeat of the family we used to be. "We are okay," I told him. "We are going to be okay." I carried him into the kitchen and found a can of tuna in the back of the cupboard, one of the few things Marcus deemed unworthy of stealing. I fed him, watching him eat with a voracious hunger. While he ate, I pulled out my phone. I had one more piece of business to handle. I dialed the number for the auction house Marcus had used. I had found the card in the trash can in the library, along with the empty Scotch bottle. "DuPont Auctions," a voice answered. "This is Camille Fairmont," I said, my voice steel. "I am the owner of the Cliffside Estate. You purchased a large collection of books, art, and furniture from my stepfather, Marcus Thorne, earlier this week." "Ah, yes," the man said, sounding wary. "We have a bill of sale, ma'am. It was a legal transaction." "It was not," I corrected him. "Marcus Thorne did not have title to those items. He has been arrested by the FBI for wire fraud and theft. The items you have in your possession are technically stolen property. I have the case number from Special Agent Miller if you would like to verify that." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Dealing in stolen goods could cost an auction house its license. "I see," the man stammered. "We were not aware. He claimed he was the executor." "I am sure he did," I said. "Now, I am not interested in a long legal battle to reclaim my property, and I am sure you are not interested in the FBI raiding your warehouse to recover evidence. So here is my offer. I will reimburse you the exact cash amount you paid Marcus, which I know was a fraction of the actual value, plus a 10% inconvenience fee. You will load everything back into a truck and have it back in my driveway by 5 o'clock today." 10%. He hesitated. "Ma'am, we have overhead." "Or," I interrupted, "I call Agent Miller and tell him where his evidence is, and you get nothing." "The truck will be there at 4:30, the man said quickly. I hung up. I didn't care about the money. I had the estate. I had my job. I could make more money. But I couldn't make another copy of To Kill a Mockingbird with my mother's name written inside the cover. I walked upstairs to the master bedroom. This was the hardest part. I stood in the doorway, looking at the bed where my mother had spent her final days. The bed was unmade. The sheets were tangled, a testament to the people who had slept there last night. Sienna's makeup bag was still on the vanity, open and spilling powder onto the wood. I walked over and swept the makeup into the trash can. I stripped the bed, pulling the sheets off with a violence that surprised me. I bundled them up and marched them straight to the trash chute. I wasn't washing them. I was burning them. I opened the windows in this room too, letting the sea air scour the space. I would buy new linens. I would paint the walls. I would change the furniture. This would be my room now, but it would be a room that honored my mother, not one that preserved the memory of her illness or her husband's betrayal. I walked out onto the balcony. The sun was high now, turning the ocean into a sheet of hammered diamonds. I leaned against the railing, looking down at the cliffs where the waves crashed against the rocks. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folder Arthur had given me, the original will. I opened it to the page with the life estate clause. I traced the words with my finger, to my husband, Marcus, provided he does not attempt to sell. My mother knew. She had loved him, yes, but she was a businesswoman. She knew that people show you who they really are when money is on the table. She had built a safety net for him, but she had also built a trap door. She had protected me from beyond the grave. She had given me the weapon I needed, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment I was strong enough to use it. "You knew," I whispered to the wind. "You knew he would do it." I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of peace. My mother wasn't a victim. She was a strategist. She had checkmated him before the game even started. I closed the folder and went back inside. By late afternoon, the truck arrived. I watched as the movers, much more careful this time under my watchful eye, carried the books back into the library. I placed the globe back on its stand. I hung the painting of the storm over the fireplace. It wasn't exactly as it was before. The house had scars. There were scratches on the floor, and empty spaces where some smaller items had been lost forever. But it felt right. It felt lived in. It felt like a survivor. I set up my laptop on the desk in the library. Oliver jumped up and curled into a ball next to my keyboard, his purr vibrating through the wood. I opened a new document. I had a report to write for Arthur, detailing the recovery of the assets. But before I started, I looked out the window one last time. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. The lighthouse in the distance began to blink, a steady rhythmic pulse of light in the gathering dusk. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I had my home. I had my dignity, and I had the absolute certainty that justice had been served. Marcus was sitting in a cell right now, staring at a concrete wall. I was sitting in my library, watching the sunset. He had tried to erase me. Instead, he had written himself out of the story completely. I typed the date at the top of the page. It was a new day, the first day of the rest of my life. I leaned back in the chair, took a sip of the tea I had just brewed, and smiled. Revenge is a dish best served legally, and sometimes, the best way to evict a monster is to let him believe he owns the castle. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it brought you some satisfaction to see justice served in the end. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please leave a comment below and let me know which country or city you are listening in from. And share your thoughts on Marcus's punishment. Was 15 years enough? If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Family Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video get discovered by more people who need to hear that sometimes. The good guys do win. See you in the next story.